pitiful technician's daughter. You'll never get out of the mud, laughed her classmates. And 15 years later, Carolina sat at the railway station on her day off and looked hopefully at the people passing by her. On a small table in front of the girl were laid out a variety of papier-mâché figures, very skillful, and hand-colored with acrylic paints, small animals, birds, scenes from children's fairy tales. All this regularly attracted the attention of potential buyers. Except that, having learnt the price, they immediately turned away sullenly with the words, "Why is it so expensive? My Thomas can make such nonsense in a couple of minutes, and paint it even faster. What's all this money for?" Caroline only pressed her lips together in embarrassment. She was asking for nothing. But the inhabitants of their provincial town, who were used to saving money on almost everything, did not want to pay for the labor of her invalid father, even if she was also thrown into the mud every time. "What kind of an exclusive you have that you ask so much?" Caroline tried to sell figurines at the railway station in the hope that some of the capital's tourists would be able to appreciate these creations. But she was quickly kicked out. She was told to pay a percentage or get out. Carolina wouldn't have minded paying for her workplace, but the amount the racketeers told her was a mockery 10,000 a day. "Where am I going to get that kind of money?" she asked the big man in the tracksuit, who was not shy of smoking a stinking cigarette in front of her. "In a month, God willing, I'll be able to earn at least half of that." The burly man exhaled the acrid smoke into the girl's face with relish, then smiled wryly. "Well, it's what you wanted, baby. This is big business, by the way. If you want, you can always pay for the place in kind." The man gave the girl a steely stare that made Caroline want to wash herself at once. "Don't," she muttered grimly, lowering her gaze. "I'll pack everything up and go now, then." The bully hummed disappointedly. Caroline shook her head negatively. "Like, we could make a deal." The creep held out his big tobacco-smelling hand to Caroline. However, the girl staggered sharply to the side, warningly. "I'm going to scream or call the police for help. Just try to touch me." The jock lowered his hand, and for a second it hovered in the air a centimeter from her face. Then he grinned and said playfully, "And you're not stupid at all, and you're beautiful. You shouldn't want to join our company. You should buy yourself some clothes. You walk around like a bum in your last rags." "I don't mess with bandits," the girl answered him in a serious tone and began to put her rustic luggage into a small sports bag given to her by her father. She was about to leave the platform when the bandit suddenly blocked her way with his massive torso. He looked down at her like she was a bug and smiled nastily at her. "Let me through," the girl mumbled without looking at him. The boogeyman in reply bent closer to her and in a low voice said threateningly, "You think properly, Caroline," he exhaled along with another puff of smoke. Her name. "You'd be better off with me, and it's in your best interest. You're almost out of high school. Where do you go from here? Do you know the connections I have in this town? If I say the word, no one will hire you. Not even as a cleaner. So you won't be able to continue your mum's career. I'll take care of that." "There's already someone to take care of me," replied the girl, boldly looking the scoundrel in the eye. "I said I won't come here again. Let me pass. Or I'll really call the police now." "Is this about your daddy, or what?" The man grinned and gave a bullhorn with the toe of his trainers. "He won't help you, if anything. And the police here think they all work for me." The thug looked around and added briefly, "Anyway, I've told you everything. Don't you say anything to him, and don't you pawn me off." Carolina, who turned 17 earlier this year, did look a little older than her age trim thanks to daily jogging and her technician mother's help cleaning the shops. And at the same time, slim as a graceful rose, she was admired by almost all the boys at school. However, because of the low social status of her family, no one, except for such criminals as this big guy was he himself looked no more than 20, did not consider the girl as a love interest. Caroline herself never looked for romantic adventures and devoted all her free time exclusively to helping her parents. But even if this scoundrel had suddenly turned out to be the last man on earth, she would never have agreed to be his date. The girl saw a couple of times, as near the only nightclub in their town, gangsters like him left in the arms of young, disappointed, dressed in short skirts. Caroline didn't have to guess who they were. She was old enough to realize how complicated real life was. But even in her worst dream, The girl couldn't imagine such a shameful future awaiting her. "I'll give you a sweet life in this little town. Don't doubt it," said the scoundrel. Standing before this unpleasant force, Caroline began to feel herself slowly but surely overcome by fear. After all, she was all alone in the station, and there was no one to protect her. Fortunately, at that moment, the villain's mobile phone rang, and Caroline, taking advantage of the fact that he was distracted, hurriedly slipped out of the bandit's sight. She returned home that day depressed and penniless. It was the last Sunday in May, which meant that she had the longest and most horrible week before graduation ahead of her. All her classmates would only talk about who and what dress to wear, and what hairstyle and manicure to choose for this important holiday. And guys will try as soon as possible to invite the prettiest girls of the school to the ball. And only Caroline, of course, no one will be invited to spend time at the last school party in her life. Nor will she have any dress, shoes, or manicure. "Honey, are you okay, Jennifer?" the girl's mother inquired cautiously. "You're all pale today. Didn't manage to sell anything at all." Caroline covered her eyes with her hands, unable to hold back the tears that were about to spill. "My girl, what's wrong? Has someone hurt you?" the woman asked again, clasping her crying daughter to her side. "I don't want to go to this stupid prom," Caroline finally managed to utter, trying to control her sobs. Jennifer stroked her daughter's soft, dark blonde, shiny hair and looked into her lovely golden brown eyes. "Honey, but prom is one of the most important days in any girl's life, isn't it? Are you sure you want to miss such an important event? There won't be a second time like this in your life," her mother warned her. Caroline only sobbed a couple of times, then sat down on the bed and began to wipe her eyes thoroughly with a handkerchief. "And it's a good thing it won't," she said. "What haven't I seen at this feast of female vanity? The guests will all do nothing but show off their expensive dresses to each other and drink cheap red wine, while the class teacher and the principal discuss the biggest gossip of the year in a corner of the gym." Jennifer smiled at her daughter, but Caroline saw a slight sadness in that smile. "Are you really that worried about not having anything to wear?" she asked affectionately. "I've already put some money aside for you for a dress. And the shoes, you can have my shoes. Do you remember the loafers like that? I married your father in them." Her mother's eyes clouded with unpleasant memories. Sometimes Caroline marveled at how much her parents loved each other, even though they had lived together for many years and endured hardships. Jennifer had come to this town from a remote village where she had been raised by her grandmother until she came of age. Unfortunately, Jennifer was never able to enroll in any educational institution to continue her studies. The knowledge she received in the village was barely enough to keep her from starving. The young girl was offered only low-skilled work as a cleaner, or, even worse, openly obscene offers. In order to get a foothold in this place and make ends meet, Caroline's mother got a job as a floor cleaner in the office of a taxi company near the station. It was there that she met Michael, her future husband. Michael had been working as a taxi driver for several years and was earning quite well. He was immediately attracted to a modest, pretty cleaner who came to their town from the province. Her purity and openness touched the heart of the man, so that soon the taxi driver invited the girl to the first date, after which he and Jennifer began to officially meet. About a year later, the couple planned a wedding, after which the young people happily lived in marriage for almost 10 years. During this time, they had Caroline, a charming daughter, the name Jennifer gave because of her great love for the flower of the same name. All this time, the woman continued to work in a taxi park, and her husband to drive the residents to the suburbs. The salary received by Jennifer was not large, but thanks to Michael, their small family steadfastly kept afloat, being able, though not lavish, but to buy everything necessary for life. The year that little Caroline turned 11, however, disaster came knocking. Michael was driving an elderly couple from the village back to the city. The weather that autumn was very wet, and it was raining constantly. Because of this, the driver had to be doubly attentive on the wet road, making sure that he could fit into the next corner or brake in time at the traffic lights. The elderly people Michael was driving, as it turned out, were very unrestrained and overly emotional. The elderly people Michael was driving were, as luck would have it, very unrestrained and overly emotional. They were constantly dissatisfied with something and threatened to write a complaint against the taxi driver. because of this Caroline's father now and then distracted from the road, trying to pacify the nagging couple. At one of these sensitive moments, the man missed a warning sign and, unable to control himself, smashed through an iron fence, sending him and his passengers into a ditch. The car flipped several times on the steep slope before stopping its fateful course. As luck would have it, the elderly couple were virtually unhurt, with only a few scratches, while Michael's life hung in the balance. His right arm was damaged so badly that the man risked dying at any moment due to heavy blood loss. Doctors miraculously managed to save his life, but the mutilated arm, alas, had to be amputated. When the taxi driver regained consciousness, he could not believe what had happened for a long time. How could it be? He was the breadwinner of the family. What would happen to his wife and daughter? Jennifer managed with great difficulty to calm him down and assure him that life goes on. No matter what happened, they would always be together. And she would do whatever was necessary to get them through these hard times. Since then, Caroline's mother has had to work 3 times as hard, taking extra shifts at the city hospital as well as at her daughter's school. Although Michael fell into a brief apathy at first, soon enough he was able to pull himself together. After all, with one arm or two, he continued to be the head of the family and could not allow himself to be completely supported by his wife and daughter. Caroline was by then already actively helping her mother. The man began to develop his left arm and look for ways to earn an alternative income. Naturally, working in a taxi was out of the question. After another 6 months, he mastered the art of creating papier-mâché figurines and weaving baskets from vines, for which he traveled to the nearest forest, where he collected suitable wood. Persistent and strong-minded, Michael was ready to sell the fruits of his labor himself. But to this occupation, all the local men who personally knew Caroline's father treated not so much with contempt, but rather with a slight sneer. They said that he had been a normal man, driving people around, and now he had stooped to selling baskets in the street. Then Caroline offered her father to sit instead of him on a busy shopping street of the town with his daughter. "Is it enough for you to walk the corridors to class with your mother?" she asked. The father refused at first out of pride. "It's not good enough for you. I understand how your classmates look at you because of that," he said. Caroline was embarrassed, but tried to brush it off. "To hell with them," the girl answered him, smiling. "I'm not doing this to amuse them, but because we need the money. You spend a lot of time on this weaving and figurines, and women are much more willing to buy such things. What about your studies?" Her father looked at her doubtfully. "What about my studies? Studying won't run away," Caroline answered him simply. "I will trade at weekends, and first I will try the squares. Or the markets, then I'll go to the railway station. A lot of people pass by there during the day. Maybe we'll make some money." Michael furtively brushed a large tear from the corner of his eye. He thanked God every day for giving him such a beautiful, understanding, and supportive family. He could hardly have dreamed of anything more in his life. Except that it was a little hard without a hand. "All right," he agreed. "But only after work, straight home. I don't want you to fall behind in your classes because of this." "Don't worry," laughed back her daughter. "I learn new material quickly. As my teachers tell me, everything will be fine." Caroline shook her father's hand encouragingly and thought about how much she loved her family. For the sake of these people, she was ready to endure any difficulties, as long as they were healthy, fed, and had the opportunity to meet each new day with joy. Michael not unreasonably worried about the attitude of classmates to his daughter. No matter how friendly Caroline tried to behave with them, the school community flatly refused to accept her. Although the girl turned out to be the most attractive, not at all awkward in the class, and regularly received only excellent grades in physical education, other, more successful classmates only did that sought to tease Caroline at every opportunity. "What, Carolina, are you preparing for your after-school program again?" Vanessa, the first beauty of the class, mocked her in the locker room. "Let me guess, do you have an extra class today to carry buckets of water or not?" "Oh wait, must be obstacle course practice. You're jumping up and down the stairs with a mop?" Vanessa was laughing a hysterical, unpleasant laugh. Caroline had to restrain herself from saying something equally caustic and unflattering. The girl tried to avoid school fights, but it did not mean that she was ready to tolerate such an attitude to herself until the end of her senior year. "Vanessa, you'd better finish taking your weight loss supplements," she said calmly. tying her old trainers. The classmates' laughter broke off abruptly. I'm serious. It's already melted your brains. You're laughing like a lunatic. Vanessa's face instantly contorted into a grimace of anger and disgust. Caroline realized she'd guessed right. Vanessa had been frantically trying to lose weight for the past few months to fit into the designer dress her parents had promised her for the prom. The only problem was that the size range of such outfits ended exclusively at size 42. You little brat, you filthy little brat. You'll never get married with such a horrible pedigree. So you're wasting your time training and running 5 kilometers a day. The girl was ready to run even 10 kilometers. She spat out in anger. The most you can be in this town is an elite call girl. And that's if you don't despise sleeping with a girl who's been mudding like a pig since high school. Vanessa threw with all her might at Caroline a dirty rag that the cleaning lady had left in the locker room so she wouldn't have to go far to get a change of clothes. The piece of cloth fell on Carolina's head with a loud smack, and all the girls in the room burst out laughing. Serves her right, you upstart. Show her where she belongs, will you? Vanessa was taunted by her friends. You think you can open your filthy mouth here? Caroline was shaking like a fever. She had never felt such hatred from others. More than anything else in the world, she wanted to disappear, to dissolve like vapor from water on a hot surface. She didn't realize how she had shouted in her heart to all those puffed-up puppets. Choke on your anger. All you know is to wash the bones of blokes, don't you? You have no interests in each other's lives except money and rags. I hate you all, you puffed-up pussies. Caroline didn't realize how she had jumped out of the changing room. The girl rushed past all the other students and ran down the corridor right into the street. Once she was in the school stadium, she heard a chant. Caroline. Class hadn't started yet. Where are you going? Harry, the gym teacher, shouted after her. But the girl didn't listen to him. She ran 5 laps in a row before her heart was able to beat again. Caroline didn't know where she got her ability to run, but she was sure that everything in life is given to a person for a reason. And if she had the opportunity to develop this ability, then she should use it, especially since running was the only thing that helped her calm down and bring her chaotic thoughts into relative order. Trying to regain her breath, Caroline approached her classroom. The boys, lined up in a row and unaware of what had recently happened in the girls' locker room, looked at their classmate with surprise, and some with outright envy. Watch and learn. The gym teacher waved his hand in Carolina's direction. 3 kilometers in 10 minutes. And your shoes are ready to be included in the Olympic team. Not like you idiots. To the left, go, 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 go. There was a loud whistle, and Carolina's classmates, with dejected faces, ran their standard 6 laps. Well done, Caroline. Harry patted her on the shoulder. Take a rest, bye. It's the first time I've seen results like yours in 5 years. A real talent. The gym teacher shook his head and went off to follow the older students, while Caroline sat on the sports bench and pondered his words. Sure, it was a little late for her to start a sports career, but could her running talents be applied in a more productive way? The answer to this question the girl has not yet found for herself, precisely because of the incident in the locker room, and also because of a series of regular petty bullying from other girls. Caroline did not want to go to the prom. However, Jennifer still managed to persuade her daughter not to miss such a momentous event. After all, it's better to take your diploma from them right away, so that you don't have to go there again, the understanding mother winked. But you must never show them that you are scared. And if you don't come to the graduation, that's exactly what you'll show them. Let's not give them something to gossip about. Okay, Caroline sighed heavily, but agreed. Okay, let this be my last fight. Jennifer helped to choose and buy for her daughter the most beautiful dress they could find in an inexpensive second-hand shop, a simple cut, but at the same time very elegant and refined dress in the shade of sapphire, which perfectly emphasized Caroline's slender, athletic figure and perfectly set off the noble and yet completely natural color of her hair. The wedding shoes, which Jennifer lent to her daughter, perfectly matched the outfit and Caroline's high hairstyle, which she had also made herself. It's a pity I don't have any jewelry at all, Jennifer complained, looking sadly at the girl's festive look. Why not? Michael suddenly joined the gathering and grinned slyly at his favorite women. "Dad, are you what?" Caroline looked at him uncertainly, and in her eyes Michael read anxiety and worry. "Don't tell me you bought something for me." "It ended sadly," Caroline said with a smile. "I did." Her father nodded with a smile and pulled a small velvet box out of his shirt pocket. Caroline was incredibly embarrassed. Not only had her mother bought her a dress that was simply magical by the girl's standards, but her father had managed to throw away a considerable amount of money for her. "Why?" Caroline asked him guiltily. But Michael had already reached out to her and put a box in her hand. "It's a little miracle." "Open it," he said. Caroline opened the lid with a sinking heart. On a white velvet cushion lay a tiny gold pendant in the shape of a star. The five-pointed beauty shone proudly with its rays, even though it was no bigger than a fingernail on Caroline's index finger. Each ray of the star ended in a tiny shining crystal, and when the light fell on the stones, they lit up a myriad of colored lights. "Oh my God, it's beautiful." Mother and daughter exhaled almost simultaneously. Michael smiled and said to the girl, "Caroline, I want you to know that you, for me, will always be a guiding star that will not let me go astray from the right course. You and Mum are my two brightest stars." With these words, the man hugged first his wife with one arm and then his daughter, who clung to her father's strong and reliable shoulder. "Thank you, Daddy," Caroline said through tears of gratitude. "I will never take it off. I will always wear it as a talisman." Michael agreed with his daughter that he would pick her up from school in the evening after the party was over. It got dark early in their neighborhood, and teenagers, when they're drunk, are a mess. You never know what to expect from them. So her father decided to insure the girl in case the drunken classmates suddenly wanted to afford too much. When Caroline entered the assembly hall, where the event was held, many of her classmates quieted down, not immediately recognizing the girl. She looked around, deciding where she could best sit so as not to draw too much attention to herself. When Vanessa suddenly appeared on the horizon, like a shark's fin in the middle of a calm ocean. The queen never walks alone. For some reason, Caroline thought at that moment the first beauty of the class was accompanied by her own entourage, consisting of 3 girls and 2 guys. And the whole company was heading straight for her. Caroline noted to herself that Vanessa didn't wear the desired dress from a famous designer. Apparently, she couldn't fit herself to the notorious beauty standards of the famous brand. Instead, Vanessa wore a perfectly tight, extremely short leather dress, whose coloring was somewhere in the middle between a flesh tone and the color of bronze powder. Good thing it doesn't blend in completely, Caroline thought. Otherwise, you'd think she'd come completely unclothed. "Well, here's our Cinderella," Vanessa said, stretching her vowels. "Cute dress. Did you get it secondhand? It's okay. It's okay. You can wear it once, and then it'll be handy for scrubbing floors." Caroline gritted her teeth to keep from telling her what she thought of her provocative outfit. At that moment, Vanessa noticed the gold pendant around her neck. How lovely. The classmate's eyes flashed, and she reached out her hand to touch the jewel. "Don't touch it," Caroline sharply brushed her fingers away. "It's a present from Daddy," she said with a caustic grin. "It hurts." Vanessa replied with a scornful arch of her eyebrow. "It's just a cheap thing you bought on sale anyway." "If I asked, my parents would give me a dozen of them," Vanessa said. She turned and led the other boys, who followed reluctantly after their leader. Caroline chuckled softly. It seemed that Vanessa's superiority was beginning to bore even her most devoted fans. After the graduation ceremony, the real disco began. Under the influence of good mood, invigorating music and hot drinks, everyone danced. As they say, who can do what they like? Caroline did not dance. She wanted to leave immediately after receiving her papers. But the headmistress asked her to stay and be with the guys a little longer, because it was the last time we were all together. Although Caroline was not particularly eager to continue the evening, she gave in to the headmistress' request. When the slow dance sounded, the hall was illuminated with soft and languid light. The girl saw someone approaching her. The figure emerging from the pink smoke was Andrew, Vanessa's boyfriend. "Hi, Caroline." Andrew began, smiling languidly. "You look really good tonight. Can I ask you to dance?" Caroline was embarrassed. She realized that something was wrong. Why would Vanessa's boyfriend ask her to slow dance? Wouldn't your lover be angry? She tried to joke. She couldn't believe that the most handsome guy in the school wanted to dance with her. A slight shadow ran across the guy's face. No, she won't. I'm sick of her, he rolled his eyes. All I hear every day is, Andrew, am I pretty Andrew, am I pretty Andrew, have I lost weight? The scales don't seem to be reading right, and so on and so forth. It became impossible to communicate with her. Caroline held back a laugh. No one had ever portrayed Vanessa so vividly and seemingly. Yes, she's very fond of herself, the girl nodded. Okay, but just one dance. I have to go home soon. If you say so, beautiful lady. Andrew smiled and, making an elegant gesture, offered his hand to the girl. Caroline danced a slow dance for the first time in her life. It was an amazing, unlike anything she had ever felt before. It was as if a whole swarm of small colored hummingbirds had been released inside her, and the tiny birds were flying all over her body, giving every movement of the girl a truly airy lightness. Andrew looked at her so intently, as if he really wondered what Caroline was like. What kind of person was she? What is she like? Immersed in her romantic thoughts, Caroline did not immediately notice a figure with a touch of bronze powder flashed behind her. Get out of here, Vanessa hissed. Caroline had no time to react when Andrew's strong hands grabbed her by the shoulders and turned her around to face her rich classmate. In the next second, Vanessa spewed a huge amount of tomato juice from a paper bag at her with all her might. Caroline gasped at the nasty, brackish taste. The first minute she was afraid that she had poured real pig's blood on her, like in a popular horror film. Drink, drink, you cesspit, Vanessa said, pouring juice all over the unfortunate classmate. You miserable fool. What are you doing? Did you really believe Andrew just wanted to dance with you? You thought he liked you? Vanessa tilted her head and started laughing like a lunatic. The smoke and the light made it look like Caroline had been doused with something black like tar. Stop it, stop it. Vanessa, you're crazy. Caroline shouted back at her, trying to get out of Andrew's grasp. He released her, and she began to shake off the sticky, salty liquid. Her dress was hopelessly ruined, as was her hair. And what was most tragic of all, her mom's wedding shoes. God, how can you be such a monster, Vanessa? Caroline asked her in despair. Why do you hate me so much? Vanessa condescended to answer, smiling with all her 32 teeth. It's a joy to hate you. I despise you, Caroline. Because people like you are always trying to get out of your dirty hole, like mice waiting for someone to deliver cheese for them outside. You should know your place and keep your head down, Vanessa said. What do you think? I didn't see you flashing your legs at our boys in gym class. What, Caroline? From the shock, Caroline struggled to speak. Vanessa, come on. I'm just a good runner. And it's nobody's fault that you can't stop eating fries in packs. Apparently, that last remark had finally pissed Vanessa off, and all the anger and meanness that had been in her until that moment came out. She took a swing at her classmate. Vanessa sharply lowered her perfectly manicured hand and grabbed the chain around Caroline's neck and pulled off the pendant Michael had given her. Did you think you could be better than me? Vanessa whispered, clutching Caroline's gold star in her fist. But I have money and social standing, and all you have is your filthy rag, which you will use every day for the rest of your life to mop the floors of this school or some rundown hospital on the outskirts of town. Caroline lunged for the wretch, but Andrew grabbed her arms, preventing her from resisting Vanessa. Give it back now, the girl shouted tearfully. You have no right to even touch him. You're the most disgusting person I've ever known. Give me the pendant back. Vanessa held the pendant up to Caroline's face, knowing full well that she couldn't take it away from her. Then she released the chain from her fingers, and the little star swung in front of her nose like a hypnotist's pendulum. You're a pathetic cleaning lady's daughter, and you'll never get close to being a normal person, Vanessa said in a thick, low voice. Repeat after me, I know my place, Vanessa, and I'm the pathetic daughter of a maintenance worker. Go to hell, Vanessa, Caroline said, glaring hatefully at the blonde in the leather dress. The resentment swept over her head, preventing her from snapping out of the feeling of all-consuming anger. Do it again, or you'll never see your jewel again, Vanessa whispered again. She wanted to throw the pendant on the floor to crush it with the heel of her lacquered shoes. But at that moment, the general light flashed brightly, and the teenagers saw Megan's headmistress looking at them with all the sternness she was capable of. "What the hell is going on here, Vanessa?" she asked the rich alumna angrily. Then she glared menacingly at Andrew, who instantly released Caroline. The girl didn't hold back her feelings and slapped the henchman with an impressive slap. "You filthy henchman," Caroline said through gritted teeth. Then she held out her open palm to Vanessa. "Give it back. What you took now." Vanessa. The headmistress looked at her reproachfully. Vanessa put the pendant back into Caroline's palm, being careful not to touch her, after defiantly wiping her hands on her dress. "Megan, can I go home?" Shaking with humiliation and resentment, Caroline asked her. "My dad is probably waiting for me outside." She realized that at that moment she had become an absolute laughingstock in front of all the students and teachers at her school. Megan looked at the girl with genuine regret and said briefly, "Of course, dear, go. Have a happy life after school," she added belatedly. But Caroline was already closing the doors to the assembly hall behind her, and at the same time to this horrible part of her now definitive past. After graduation, Carolina had been in a terrible state. For almost a month, not wanting to go out, she hadn't discussed what had happened with her parents. When Michael met her at the school and saw in what moral and physical state is his daughter, the man was ready to tear and throw. "Daughter, just tell me, who are the bastards who did this to you? They're your classmates, right?" "What difference does it make?" Caroline waved it off. "Forget it, Dad. It was just some fools playing a joke on me like that. Luckily, I don't have to hang out with any of them anymore. I can't even see this school. Let's go home." The distraught father calmed his daughter down as best he could, but he returned home feeling quite upset. His sacred duty was to protect his daughter's own blood. And now this. And Caroline, a light-hearted person, flatly refused to reveal the names of the villains. Michael could not, with all his will, break into the school and shake this information out of the teachers. Jennifer reassured her husband, saying that if her daughter didn't want to talk about it, then there was no need to get involved, so she had to deal with it on her own. Besides, she assured her husband, "Caroline always knows that we are close by, and we will always help her with everything she needs. Our daughter is very strong. If she needs our help, you and I will know about it, believe me." Caroline, meanwhile, was lying on her bed, clutching the tattered chain of her pendant in her hand. It wasn't even the dress or the nasty words Vanessa had said that hurt the most. Most of all, Caroline was tormented by anger for the spoiled gift of her father. She realized that the chain could be repaired, but she didn't want to burden her parents with it, telling them that she had just taken the pendant off and put it back to her. Caroline contemplated her future. Now that the hated school was over, the girl could for the first time consciously choose what to do with her life next. She realized that she had no prospects in this city. But to enter a good university in the capital also required a lot of money. And where to get it from? A regular part-time job. From the backwoods. And Caroline couldn't just leave her parents like that. They needed help, including material aid. The girl listed in her mind what she could do best. But alas, the list wasn't that long. Running, cooking, and the ability to wax floors to a shine. God, Caroline thought, was Vanessa right after all. And I'm not going to get anywhere in this life with these opportunities. Bitter tears ran down her cheeks. It turned out that her classmate, without knowing it, had predicted her future. But Carolina was not one of those who let circumstances overrule her so easily. Therefore, the girl decided to do the following. She wanted to work all next year to save a sufficient amount of money. After that, the girl intended to go to try her luck in a large regional metropolis. There she wanted to take a course in her profession, and maybe, after passing it, find a good job with a decent salary in the center. Caroline realized that it would be a difficult path, but she was ready to endure everything to change her life, thus getting rid of Vanessa's humiliating prediction. Having told her parents about her plans, Caroline sighed with relief. They were not against the girl to try to find a decent job. Michael and his wife were very happy that their daughter finally began to come out of that terrible state. "I will continue to help Mom and Dad," promised Caroline. "But I have to think about my own destiny. I want you to be proud of me, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to achieve my dream." A couple of days later, Caroline took her CV to a recruitment agency. She offered her services as a maid and, if required, she could also act as a cook, preparing simple meals. To her surprise, the call came quite quickly after that. In just a week, the girl was already sitting in front of a female employee recruiting domestic staff for wealthy homes. The woman scrutinized her profile and then looked at Caroline intently in the eyes. "What about your stress tolerance? Can you handle unusual situations normally?" The girl was somewhat taken aback. It was the first time she had ever been asked such a question, but she answered nonetheless. "Depends on what you mean by the word unconventional." The recruiter raised an eyebrow that was perfectly fine, like a thread, and began to curl her fingers. "Well, for example, if you are suddenly insulted without reason, from your point of view, raise your voice at you, or, on the contrary, show you special attention, maybe even with elements of a slight flirtation." Caroline gasped in amazement. "Excuse me, do you want to employ me as a maid or, with all due respect, sell me to a not very decent establishment?" The girl realized that after such words she would probably never get a job. But she couldn't help herself. Whatever it was, she wouldn't let anyone humiliate her again. Never. The employee nodded her head briefly and made a note in her notebook. She then raised her eyes to Caroline again. "Well, you answer more or less politely. And your reaction is quite adequate. I will report these points to my superiors so that they can make a final decision. You see, you've had 3 maids leave this place before you, and every one of them felt obliged to tell me in color that they were not warned about how bad it was going to be." "Is that a warning?" I asked Caroline, just in case. "Consider it a warning," the personnel officer nodded. "Expect to be contacted within 3 days. If you are contacted within that time, you are accepted. You will learn the rest of the details of your job on the spot. And yes, I almost forgot. You will be required to live on the employer's premises for the duration of the contract." Caroline nodded in agreement. It was all very strange, but all the more exciting. She really wanted to be hired for this position. The salary was more than generous. There would be something to help her parents. And even if these unusual situations arose in the course of business, she would not give herself an offense. 2 days later, Caroline's mobile phone rang happily, informing the girl that she had been accepted as a maid in the house of a rich businessman. "Mom, Dad, hurrah. I have a job now," Caroline happily announced to her parents. "They said they would pick me up in 4 hours. "I'm going to go pack," Caroline said. Jennifer breathed a sigh of relief and crossed herself. Her husband gently hugged her with the arm that had survived the accident, and the girl's mother slowly lowered her head onto her husband's shoulder. "Here is our girl going into adulthood," she said slowly. "God, I wish she'd do well there." "Don't worry," Jenny Michael held her close. "Remember, you told me yourself that our daughter is a very strong person. She'll get through anything." When it was time to leave, it was not without tears. Her parents saw Caroline off with all the tenderness and warmth of their hearts, expecting her to come back next weekend to share her impressions of her new job. Carolina was picked up from her home 9-story building by a huge black business class UE. When the girl climbed into it, it seemed to her that she was inside a cruise liner, so huge was the space of the car interior. The driver turned out to be a not very talkative middle-aged man who calmly drove her to the desired destination. When she got out of the car, Caroline couldn't believe her eyes. In front of her stood a gigantic 4-story mansion, made in a completely modern style with glass and chrome metal constructions. Caroline thought involuntarily that the owner of this house must be very fond of shopping centers, if he had decided to live in one of them. She didn't voice these thoughts out loud, of course. Instead, she obediently followed the head housekeeper and housekeeper who led her to the pool, instructing the new employee along the way. "Try not to make eye contact with Oliver when he asks you something. It's best to lower your gaze and answer in a matter-of-fact manner. If you're cleaning a room and the owner suddenly walks in, you shouldn't fuss or pretend to notice his presence. Just get on with your work. Oliver is used to all the servants moving about and working almost silently. You're part of this house, and in a way you have to blend in with it and everything that goes on here. Often we don't pay attention to the owner's little quirks," the housekeeper continued. We only call the guards if we realize that it could endanger his life and health." Caroline was silent, but she felt as if she were in some modern fairy tale about an enchanted castle where everyone was silent and could not say a word to the cruel king who ruled this high-tech kingdom. The housekeeper's last sentence, however, surprised Caroline somewhat. "Excuse me, I think you said something about quirks. May I clarify what exactly was meant?" The housekeeper stopped and looked at the girl as if she were trying to see through her thoughts with invisible X-rays. "You were not warned by the agency about possible irregularities, were you?" she asked dryly. "Do I understand correctly?" "No, why not?" "They explained to me that there were some special circumstances, but what were they?" The housekeeper raised her eyebrows elegantly. "Well then, you'll soon see for yourself." The woman led her to a large rectangular pool, on the marble terrace of which sat a young man reclining in a sun lounger. He was wearing large sunglasses, a bright red Hawaiian shirt, and white knee-length shorts. The guy looked to be about 24 to 25 years old. Judging by his relaxed manner and the way he was calmly flipping through the newspaper in his lap, he was the owner's son. Pleased, the housekeeper nodded to him. Caroline arrived exactly 10 minutes ago, as the master had requested. After that, the lady silently left, leaving the girl and the young man alone. "Hello," Caroline greeted him politely. "Excuse me, do you know how long we have to wait for Oliver?" The man froze, holding the newspaper half open, and then looked at the girl in surprise from under the shimmering glasses. "I don't understand," was all he could ask. "Excuse me, but you must be the son of the owner of this house, aren't you?" Caroline answered the question with a question. "I just can't get used to how many rules there are here. I wanted to ask you about them before I met Oliver," she continued. The young man continued to stare at the maid in mute amazement. She, not knowing what to do in such a delicate situation, just stood there staring back at him. Finally, the man couldn't stand it any longer and laughed loudly. Caroline felt incredibly stupid, but still managed to squeeze out a weak smile. "Honestly, I've never had one of those before," he said through his laughter and came close to Caroline. The girl blushed instantly, not knowing if she could back away from him at least a couple of steps. The master's son came so close that Caroline could feel the fabric of his fluttering shirt with her hand. "Caroline, that's your name, isn't it?" he asked with a playful smile. "Did Amanda say it right?" "Yes, that's right." Caroline looked up at him again. "Now, Caroline, the owner of the house is not coming here for the simple reason that he is already standing in front of you. I am Oliver." Caroline stood still with her mouth open in astonishment. Without another word, the young man pushed his glasses back over his eyes, and then strode off at a steady pace toward the stairs leading to his private wing. He threw her a final glance without turning round. "I like you, Caroline. You are now definitely accepted. Please tell Amanda and ask her to come and see me when she has a free moment." With these words, he disappeared, leaving Caroline in a half-faint with excitement. Caroline told the housekeeper that the master was waiting for her. She pressed her lips together and showed her into the back room, where she gave her all the necessary clothes and the key to her room. "Remember, we rise at 6, so you won't be seen or heard. And no matter how embarrassed you are, you must continue to do your job. Do you understand?" "Understood," Caroline replied, thoroughly embarrassed. Caroline went to her room to change. Thus began the working day for the girl. She soon realized what Amanda had meant when she spoke of Oliver's quirks. It turned out that he loved to host big costume parties with loud music, beautiful women, and expensive drinks. Besides Caroline herself, there were about 15 other people working in the house, and they all behaved as if they were exactly the same things in the young millionaire's mansion, like some floor vase or a painting hanging on one of the walls. It was, of course, very disconcerting to the girl that all the employees of Oliver's house were acting quietly and inconspicuously. After all, Oliver had clearly made it clear to her that he could socialize with them as ordinary people. Amanda, however, continued to insist on numerous rules of behavior even after her host had summoned her to talk to her. Well, Caroline couldn't cross her either. In the first month of work, she received a substantial advance on her card, part of which she immediately sent to her parents. Oliver remained an inscrutable mystery to her. He could easily walk up and kiss one of the young gardeners he paired with her. They were twin sisters and tended an incredibly beautiful winter garden, but at the same time he never allowed himself any flirtations of a certain kind with her or them. For these purposes, Oliver had far more experienced girls who could safely be called mistresses. One named Molly stood out among them. The long-legged, red-haired beauty spent most of her time with Oliver, and he, in turn, increasingly applied the definition of fiancé to her. The entire staff of the house concluded that soon the young people would be married and their master would have a legitimate wife. However, this eccentric rich man had a completely different side. Very often, especially in the evening, Caroline found the young man immersed in the affairs of his company. He would sit for hours at his desk, and sometimes Caroline was sure he worked all night long. She had never once heard him say a rude word to anyone in the household. And if any of the workers made serious mistakes, Oliver always spoke to them in private, locked away in his office. But his fiancée Molly did not share this peaceful coexistence with the staff. She was always picking on everything, shouting at everyone, and the young maids, including Caroline, tried to bring her to tears. "Why are you talking here during working hours?" she shouted at the girls. "Don't you have anything else to do? Look around, dust, dirt, carpets. You're not sweeping properly. Get back to work, you slackers. Well, when Oliver and I get married, I'll get to work on you. How many of you have Amanda taught you? It's all over the place. What are you looking at me for? Look me in the eye when I'm talking." Molly growled at them like a wild tigress, imagining herself the mistress of the house. The maids held on with all their might, unable to endure her terrifying screams and shrieks. God forbid Oliver should marry that Molly, one of the maids complained to her in the kitchen. "Caroline, then we'd all be ruined." "What can she do to you?" Caroline asked her with a smile. "She's not his wife yet. You're not panicking yet." Millie looked at the girl and said with bitterness in her voice, "You just don't know her, Caroline. This is not a woman. That's jealousy and greed combined. Only in stilettos. She'd run us all to pieces, I'll bet. She's jealous of her master's every plate. The other day she complained to him that we were too pretty to walk round the house and charm him with our slim legs." Beatrice and Caroline laughed together, realizing how absurd the situation was, especially when it came to a man like their master. "I can't lose this job," Beatrice continued sadly. "I have a little son in the village with my mother. I work here and send them money so that Matthew will not need anything." "I understand," Caroline said. "My parents have always lived very modestly in another town, so this place is a real chance for me to make a name for myself." Beatrice looked out the window at the full moon hanging over the horizon and smiled dreamily. "Oliver's very good," she murmured, as if in confidence. "He has his quirks, of course, but he's not as cruel as Amanda says he is. I suspect she's made him look like that to us on purpose, so that we'll work harder and not relax." "He is a little strange," Caroline agreed, and looked away from Beatrice, lest she should read into it the feelings that Caroline felt every time she remembered how close Oliver had been to her. He is very young, and for the owner of such a huge company, how had he achieved all this? "He inherited it 3 years ago," Beatrice replied simply. "Since then, he's had these oddities of working non-stop and resting all the time. His father, Marcus, was poisoned at a business dinner. The police were never able to figure out who did it. You could say the culprit is still walking free. And Oliver is very afraid that at any moment he could be next." Really, Caroline was genuinely surprised. "Well, yes," Beatrice nodded. Caroline was struck to the heart. She had never imagined that such a tragedy could have befallen this outwardly light and cheerful person. "I think," Beatrice continued, "that all these parties and phobias, like the fact that he always takes our cook, Kevin, and one of the maids with him when he goes to other cities, are all ways of distancing himself from this personal drama. Oliver, he loved his father so much, he can't seem to get over losing him. And the bastards who sent Marcus to the grave never got what they deserved. I guess it's all hit him too hard," Caroline muttered thoughtfully to herself. Who would have thought that the rich had more trouble than the common people? All the next night, Caroline could not sleep for some unknown reason. Everything seemed to be going well, but her mind drifted back and forth to Oliver. "I wish I knew what kind of man he really is. Maybe this bravado is just a mask, someone more vulnerable, someone she could probably help. A couple of weeks later, exactly what Beatrice had told her about happened. Oliver was going on a business trip of great importance to his business, and, as he always did, he took Kevin, his longtime cook, and his maid with him. The latter, to his great amazement, was Caroline herself. "Why are you so surprised?" Oliver asked her with a slight chuckle. "I need someone I can trust 100% to clean my room and control the food I eat during the trip. I don't think it's a big deal." "Yes, but you don't know me at all," Caroline objected. "I haven't been with you that long. What if I can't do it?" The young man's face took on a serious expression, and then he replied in a voice that sent shivers down Caroline's spine. "Well, if you can't do it, then you and I will have to part. Or we can do it right now if you're not sure you're ready for a business trip. Because that's what a business trip is to you." "No, it's not. Of course I'll go with you," Caroline said with her lips pressed together. How could she be so foolish as to think that this calculating businessman could have a soul? If Beatrice was right about his worries about her father's death, he was either hiding them very well, or her friend was mistaken. Because how could a man who was ready in 2 seconds to fire another man standing in front of him at that very moment be worried? No, Caroline shook her head as she left her boss's office. Oliver could be anything, but he's certainly not a bereaved person in need of comfort. When all the things were packed and Caroline and Kevin were getting into one of the 2 large jeeps, one for her and the cook, and the other for Oliver and his guard, Kevin said to Caroline with a kind smile, "Don't you worry so much, my dear. I've been traveling with the owner for years, and it's always been fine. It's only for a couple of days. There's nothing to worry about." Caroline answered the cook with a calm but somewhat detached smile. She herself was pricked by something inside her. A bad feeling plagued the young maid. Suddenly, looking up at the upper windows of the mansion, she thought she saw a familiar silhouette flicker into Oliver's study, for a tiny fraction of an instant. She even thought she saw someone's fiery red hair through the window. But it couldn't be. Molly had gone to some foreign resort the other day, and was not expected to return for another week at the earliest. "It must be your imagination," Caroline said to herself. "You should read less detective stories at night." With these thoughts, the girl got into the car. At first the road was good, and the way through a dense forest seemed to the girl even picturesque. But gradually, the closer they got to the wide stone bridge, the more potholes were encountered on their way. The driver explained to Caroline that the road had not been repaired for a long time, and therefore they had to be especially careful here. "You don't have to explain to me," she nodded, remembering the tragedy that had happened to her own father. The driver wanted to say something else to Caroline, but suddenly he was attracted by something unusual happening ahead with Oliver's car. His business car, which was considered one of the most reliable in the world, suddenly began to swerve on the road. Every now and then his driver was swerving sideways. "What the hell is going on up there?" was all the driver of the Jeep with the cook and the maid could manage to say. When the car in front of him went over the bridge railing at full speed and fell into the water with a loud splash. "Oliver," was all Caroline could exclaim in despair. But then their car began to do the same kind of pretzels. "What happened?" Kevin asked, horrified, his huge blue eyes now huge. "Are we all going to crash now?" "Don't talk rubbish, Kevin," shouted the driver, trying to hold on to the steering wheel. "I don't understand. I just had a full inspection last week. What the—" He didn't have time to finish, because their Jeep also failed to slow down and went full speed into the river after Oliver's car. Caroline couldn't remember exactly how she'd ended up underwater. It was just a protective reflex, and she opened her eyes, being already a few meters into the deep abyss. The cabin was completely submerged. This she realized at once. Sitting next to her with his eyes wide open was Kevin. Blood was oozing from the wound on his temple. And Caroline realized with bitterness that the poor man had obviously been hit when the car fell. He was dead, and so was the driver, who was almost immediately choked by the powerful torrent of water. Being an excellent swimmer, Caroline had good lung capacity, so she managed to get out of the Jeep quickly enough. The girl looked, trying to find the second car in the murky water. Finally, she saw it. Oliver's car was buried up to its bonnet in the mud, sinking to the bottom of the river. After swimming a few more meters, she saw Oliver's hands floating in the water, which she grabbed and began to pull him upwards, away from the submerged car. With great difficulty, Carolina managed not only to pull her boss up, but also to drag him to the shore, and from there to the nearest road. There, Caroline was able to stop the first car she could find and call an ambulance. Until the medics arrived, the girl gave the victim all the necessary resuscitation measures. She felt Oliver's pulse on the shore, and making sure that he was alive, tried to pump out most of the water from his lungs. Although the man coughed up enough water, he never regained consciousness, so Caroline had to carry him on her back to the nearest motorway. Caroline's own lungs burned like they were on fire. Her legs were shaking. She was sweating and coughing. But she was determined to save Oliver. When the ambulance finally arrived, Caroline described the situation to them, and they realized that there was something wrong and called the police. Caroline and Oliver were taken to the hospital, where they received all the necessary care. As the girl was hardly hurt, she was able to visit Oliver after a few long hours, which seemed like an eternity. The man, who by then had come to his senses, thanked her profusely. "You said you couldn't handle it," he said in a hoarse voice. "You not only managed, but thanks to you, I'm still alive. And I can imagine what you had to go through while you dragged me through those woods. I'm sorry, Caroline. I'm ashamed of the way I pointed out your place," Oliver said. "Come on, Oliver," Caroline said. "The most important thing is that you're breathing. My teachers at school told me I had a talent for running. I'm finally getting the hang of it. If I hadn't run so much, I wouldn't have been able to get you out." Except what?" Oliver asked her grimly. "Your colleagues Kevin, Nick, Matthew. They're all dead," Caroline said with a heavy heart. Oliver nodded understandingly. "I don't understand what happened at all. The cars were in perfect working order, I'm sure of it." Caroline, Oliver glared at his young savior. "Is something troubling you? Are you ill? Should I call a doctor?" "No," Oliver stopped her. "No, it's not that." The young man reached into his jacket, which was hanging on the chair, and pulled a thick notebook out of the pocket, followed by a pre-prepared pen, straight from the cover. He wrote something on the tiny piece of paper, and tearing it off, handed it to Caroline. "Now you are the only one I can trust." Caroline, not understanding anything, took the slip of paper from his hands. There were some numbers written on it, and the girl counted as many as 10 of them. "But what are these?" she asked. "It's a code. Don't worry, it's not for the safe," Oliver joked. "It's just from my work laptop. The computer is in my office, and I have an unusual favor to ask of you. Please, it will help me understand and solve a lot of things." Caroline nodded, and after listening to her superior's request, she drove back home. Meanwhile, an investigator came to Oliver's room. The policeman interviewed the victim and assured him that they would do everything possible to find the intruders as soon as possible. Intruders, Oliver couldn't believe his ears, so it wasn't an accident. "I'm afraid not," the policeman shook his head. "We have brought the cars to the surface, and judging by the preliminary examination, I have no consolation for you. Someone deliberately cut your brake hose, knowing that you would be traveling in very difficult road conditions," the policeman said. Oliver slowly leaned back on the pillow. "Well, they got to me, too," he breathed out heavily. "Your father's competitors," the policeman said. "I'm sorry, but I've heard about this case. As far as I understand it, they never found who was responsible for Marcus's death." Oliver nodded briefly. "I think it's the same people," he said weakly, feeling the familiar fear that the young man had been so successful at drowning out with alcohol all these years. Meanwhile, Caroline arrived at Oliver's mansion and went up to his office as inconspicuously as possible. She realized that all the cameras in the house had probably caught her, but she hoped that in case the security service was displeased with her, the owner of the mansion would somehow protect her in front of them. The girl booted up the ultra-modern flat-screen computer, then entered all 10 digits written for her by Oliver into the password field. Within a second, a blue wheel was spinning on the screen, and then access to the landlord's desktop opened up. A folder labeled Cameras clicked open. Caroline selected the appropriate date and the Garage tab, then waited for the video she wanted to see to load. Literally seconds later, Caroline saw the garage room. And then, the girl did not believe her eyes at first. A red-haired beauty in expensive shoes and the head of security, the man who was supposed to protect Oliver, entered the garage. He quickly looked around and damaged both brake hoses in the very cars they were traveling in today. What followed was an equally disgusting scene. The red-haired beast, who Caroline realized was Molly, gave her partner a kiss, after which they both left the garage at a leisurely pace. Caroline copied the tape to a flash drive, shut down the computer, and only then called the police. When the investigator and the SWAT team arrived at the mansion, the head of security was already packing his bags, expecting to run away with his girlfriend abroad. But Molly, thinking that their cunning plan had come true and Oliver was dead, had no intention of sharing her loot with her lover. Molly was picked up at the airport as she tried to leave the country. The investigation later revealed that Molly was actually working for the same people who took out Marcus, Oliver's father. She didn't take out anyone specifically, but she was promised an extremely large percentage of Oliver's wealth if he died before reaching the site of his next negotiation. So here Molly had charmed the man closest to him and put the idea in his head that she and he could be perfectly happy if they eliminated their wealthy master. Now Molly and Oliver's head of security are facing a hefty prison sentence. In addition, Oliver's ex-fiancée has shamelessly ratted out her own masters to the investigation. After all, the deal with the police guaranteed her a reduced sentence, while her lover from security will receive the maximum. Thanks to Molly's confession, the ringleaders of the rival company that had ordered Oliver's father were quickly identified. As it turned out, they were longtime enemies of their family, the family of the oldest of the brothers, who'd always wanted to take over their grand business. Oliver, coming out of the hospital, realized a lot and completely rethought his life and attitude to people. The young man first of all forever stopped with parties. In addition, Oliver permanently canceled all the stupid rules and fired Amanda, who frightened everyone. After that, he hired a completely different, kind-hearted woman who could not only manage his household perfectly, but also interacted with all his employees and co-workers as if they were family. Caroline continued her work in the house, but now they were very close friends. Their shared story of saving Oliver's life brought them together, and that was just the beginning. 15 years later, there was nowhere to park in front of the school where Caroline had once attended. The car park was packed to the gills. So many people had dreamed of seeing each other. And they'd all been classmates once. Vanessa, now an elderly woman, and once slim, stood in the middle of the hall with her husband at her side. The seated middle-aged man clearly didn't understand why he had been brought here, but he couldn't resist the will of his wealthy wife. Vanessa began to look even more full and plump than before. But whereas before her fullness had been almost imperceptible and had given her some of the glamour of her lush forms, now everything pointed only to deterioration and health problems, which Vanessa either denied or did not think it necessary to address. The woman could barely squeeze into a thin, sparkling dress, expecting, as it seems, an unforgettable wow effect from her old-school friends. However, those who admired Vanessa, and those who just pretended to admire her so as not to be pestered, could not appreciate the outfit, for the many folds made Vanessa look suspiciously like a sausage. Then a huge black car, gleaming clean, drove up to the school building. All those who were in the auditorium and were actively devouring the delicious food rushed to the window. They were curious as to who was in it. When the doors of the luxurious leather salon opened, a graceful, slender, taut leg appeared. It was wearing graphite gray boots made of the finest suede. Following this, a beautiful young woman stepped out of the car. Thin as a bamboo stalk, but not too thin either. Her body seemed to radiate health and youth, and the modest smile on her beautiful face involuntarily attracted all eyes, like a magnet. "What's going on? What are you all staring at?" Vanessa said impatiently, pushing through the crowd to the window. The woman gasped loudly, and then her face twisted with envy and anger. A few minutes later, Caroline entered the hall, beautiful and blooming like a beautiful flower. Her classmates stared dumbfounded at her gorgeous suit, a tee of English fabric, her flawless hair, and discreet but quality makeup. No one could have imagined that Caroline, whom they had all mocked so meanly in their youth, would not only not lose her natural beauty and charm, but on the contrary, become the most successful woman of them all. "Hello, Caroline, how are you?" Vanessa stepped forward. "I see you're doing pretty well for yourself. How much do you pay your beautician? Or are you still doing it the old-fashioned way with a cucumber?" Vanessa laughed, pleased with her joke. However, apart from her, no one else made a sound. "Hello, Vanessa." Caroline greeted her calmly. "I just came in for a few minutes. I wanted to see you all. Take another look at my past. One last time to make sure I hadn't lost anything." Caroline took a few more steps toward Vanessa and pointed to her neck. There, as before, hung her father's gift, a pendant in the shape of a star, which the girl had bought with her first salary. "You know, Vanessa, you haven't changed a bit," the woman told her, enjoying the way her former classmate was literally bursting with envy. "You're still just as stupid, and your jokes are stupid too." Caroline looked at Vanessa from head to toe, and with one last glance at the crowd of her former classmates who had fallen from anger, boredom, and time, she slowly made her way back to the exit, saying one last time, "You see, life always knows who has done how much good and evil. Someone chooses to follow his star or gets a chance to become one of its rays. And someone remains an empty, shiny bubble for the rest of his life, from which the whole shell, alas, crumbles with time. Happy life to you all, boys." Caroline walked down to the door of the school. Her classmates immediately rushed back to the window. Oliver got out of the car that was waiting for her outside. He was still as tall and stately as ever, only now he wore a pair of slim-fitting glasses on the bridge of his nose. He was followed first by a boy of about 12, and then a girl of about 7. The children hugged Caroline happily, and Oliver smiled as he rubbed the heads of his offspring. Caroline turned round, and Oliver gave her a long kiss, full of tenderness and love. Then, after the whole story of the cars crashing into the river, he suddenly realized how different this girl was from any woman he had ever met. Courageous, strong, unbending, like a stem of bamboo. She always knew exactly what she wanted and was determined to achieve it. And tender and shy at the same time, pure as a petal of the most beautiful rose. She gave him everything he was looking for in this world and more. When he proposed to her, she told him yes. It was the happiest day of his life. When 6 months after the wedding, Caroline told him that they were expecting a child, Oliver finally felt that he was no longer alone in the world. Now they both had a chance to live the life they both deserved, and nothing in the world could stop them. As Caroline and Oliver's car drove away, they did not see how hysterical Vanessa was long afterwards. How she tore at her artificial hair and how she cursed everything in the world, not understanding why Caroline, the technician's daughter, had been able to get everything in this life that should have been hers. Instead, all she had was money, which never made Vanessa happy. Yes, an alcoholic husband who married her just to get a good position in her father's company. Time had not spared her looks. Life hadn't added to her wisdom. And all this Vanessa realized only now, when it was too late to change anything. "Mommy, can you hear me? Are you there?" "Yes, I'm sorry, daughter. You know that when I'm after work, I can easily fall out of the conversation." Holly tried to keep her voice calm. "Dennis and my son and I will come to you for the holidays. Or do you have other plans? You tell me right away, and I'll quickly change mine." "I don't know about Dad's plans," Holly exhaled. "All I know is that they're beautiful. He left me, found a beautiful young woman, and announced it almost honestly. They've been serious for a long time. So we're officially divorced. I'm sorry to break the news on New Year's Eve. You know I'm not good at hiding things from you. Mommy, I'm coming to see you. I'm going to wait for Dennis to get home from work. Take a cab and come over. It's been so long since we've had a late-night chat." "Jane, I'm fine. You don't have to leave a 1-year-old baby at night because of me. It's not going to make me feel any better." "Mom, that baby has a dad who's an adequate, responsible, modern father. You can fool anyone with your voice, but not me. In an hour and a half, I'm sure you'll be expecting me." Holly listened to 3 quick beeps in the receiver and tried to smile helplessly. She was lucky to have a daughter. Not everyone was so lucky. Holly learned about the difficulties of the transition age only from other people's stories. She was friends with little Jane and continued to be friends with the almost grown-up Jane. She also managed to avoid worrying about her daughter's first love dramas. There were no dramas. Jane took her studies seriously. In the 2nd year, she found a job and managed to combine one thing with another. And by the end of the institute, saved up for a vacation to long-desired Italy. Of course, her parents added a little. And it happened. As in the song, quite by accident we took tickets to the neighboring seat at a high altitude. The daughter met her future husband on the airplane. Venice, Florence, Rome. 6 months of meetings upon returning home, followed by a wedding and the birth of a child. Holly delighted in the role of caring grandmother and seemed to herself almost perfectly happy. She had always felt so comfortable and at ease in the family of Jane and Dennis. In the midst of their warm love and beautiful, almost wordless understanding of each other. "It's good that my daughter is not repeating my fate," she thought gratefully one day on the subway coming back from her son-in-law's daughter's house, and she was startled at her own thoughts. What could she be dissatisfied with? She and Ben have an absolutely normal life for a couple with a long history. They do not scandalize, do not even argue on matters of principle, live peacefully. Ben earns good money and knows how to manage money wisely. She is, in general, lucky with her husband. Except for that eternal feeling of the last few years that something important is missing. In the very real love that any woman expects to meet, she had not been particularly lucky since her youth. She just accepted it calmly. After all, to be honest, there are plenty of women like her around, far more than those lucky enough to be truly loved, not for a honeymoon but for life. And until noon yesterday, Holly thought her married life was a success. She put all her heart and soul into her family and didn't consider it a sacrifice at all. She herself is pleased to take care of her husband, to arrange a cozy home where both want to rush from work. Their apartment is neither bigger nor cozier in layout than that of friends and good acquaintances, but on holidays everyone likes to gather at their place. She always has everything so well arranged. Ben's buddies often showed a joking envy. He seriously took taking care of himself for granted. Could it be any other way? If it could be, it wasn't for him. For the last couple of years, Ben had been busy building and finishing a country house, devoting all his spare time to it. He wanted not just a house, but a full-fledged, comfortable dwelling, where you can live all year round if you want. Holly had no time to go and look at the construction site every week, and at first she was very worried about it, but Ben waved it off. "Come on, you want to be everywhere. It's better for everyone if you're in charge here, and I'm in charge there." Holly realized, or she thought she realized, that he really needed something of his own, where he was the boss. Yesterday morning she had suddenly felt sick, weak at work, and her head ached so badly that the usual pill didn't help at all. Apparently she did not look well at all, because even the chief, who was called indifferent, looked at her and said, "Holly, sometimes it's better to stay home for a couple days than to take 2 weeks sick leave. Go home and get some rest. You'll be back at work the day after tomorrow. It won't affect your paycheck. I don't want a lot of exhausted employees. I'm not a despot, as some people claim." Holly nodded gratefully and went home. How wrong we sometimes are in our judgments about people, especially if they are superiors who are generally disliked. Holly quietly, trying not to make any noise, entered the apartment. Ben arrived at night after a business trip. His sleep should not be disturbed, but Ben was awake. From the living room a conversation was heard. Judging by the absence of the interlocutor's voice, Ben was talking on the phone. Holly did not immediately even realize that it was her husband speaking. The voice and intonation was as if it wasn't his. "My sweet sunshine, I'm coming over today. My old lady is pickling tomatoes after work today, according to a new recipe. The recipes are new every year, but my wife is old. I'm sorry I'm talking nonsense just to be witty. Honestly, I'll get my act together soon and tell you. I appreciate you and I'm happy you don't want to spend New Year's Eve without me. I'll decide before New Year's, I promise. I swear, my little girl. Don't be a child, understand my situation. It's not easy for me. It's more than 25 years of my life. We raised our daughter together. 5 more years and she'll look old, but she's all about family. The pantry's already bursting. She wants everything to be up to par. If I leave, she'll be all alone. There'll be no one to take care of her. I don't really care. I don't want to spend the rest of my life hanging out with men just to get away from my boring wife. I need joy in my life, and my joy is you. Holly hesitated for some reason to turn on the light in the hallway. It was enough light from the entryway, hitting the mirror, to see this woman gray, exhausted. That's what she is, no one's rival. And her husband pities her, too. Old, pathetic. If she didn't have such a headache, she would run out into the street, just to wander somewhere, until evening, or until she gets herself under control and regains her ability to think clearly. No, she wouldn't even have the strength to go down the stairs. She wanted to shut the door quietly, out of a ridiculous desire to listen to the conversation, but her husband heard the sound. He said goodbye and went out into the hallway. I decided not to make tomatoes if you basically don't care. Her strength was only enough for this ultimatum. Maybe it's for the best that you heard everything. I really hate lying to you. I should have ended it anyway. You're a good person, and I'm sorry to you. But there's no point in continuing it. Holly nonchalantly affirmed. It's nice that at least you recognize your old lady as a human being. Holly, but why the poison? Let's be honest. I'm only 53. I'm not ready to be a grandfather. I have a need for love. And why should I give it up? We raised our daughter, and we haven't had much of a connection since. You just refuse to see it, clinging to this meaningless semblance of a marriage that's like everyone else's. If you're willing to look and live like an old lady, that's your right and your choice. Take care of your granddaughter. You have someone to take care of. I would have lived like that too, like a lot of people my age. But I was lucky enough to be loved by a young, beautiful woman, and I loved her very much. Not everyone is so lucky. It's a new life, a real life. You can't give that up. It's a gift. You see, it's only now that I'm realizing how miserable I've been. This is my chance to start over. You won't be disadvantaged in any way. You're the mother of my daughter. I'm keeping this apartment for you. I won't take anything from here except my clothes and shoes. I'll live in the house with her. It's not for nothing that I've invested so much in this place. Apparently, fate has guided you don't drive a car and you haven't invested any money in it. So it's logical that it stays with me. They'll give you some money for the first time. We'll discuss the amount. It's called a kickback, Holly commented. What if I ask for too much? I said, we'll talk about it. Ben repeated patiently. You're so in love and so sensible. You've thought about everything for a long time, but you lack determination. And so everything is on top. Strategist. Holly, let's be human. In case you haven't noticed, I didn't bark at you doggy style. I don't need to have this conversation at all. I came home with a headache, and in situations like this, I lie in a warm bath. It helps. While I'm in the bath, get your stuff, your papers. What else you got? Thoughtfully, so you don't have to come back here for something you forgot. And leave the keys and file for divorce yourself. I don't like to go to court. You know I won't drag this out to spite you. Set a date, I'll come at the appointed day and hour, and we'll get divorced. No money. I've got a decent salary for me alone. Just don't show up. The day of the divorce is the last time I'll ever see you. And if you want to play the noble, give your share of the apartment to Jane, so that your lovers don't disinherit the girl. You have to admit, it's only fair. Mom, were you thinking about my inheritance at that moment? Quietly amazed Jane, listening to her story. Who should I be thinking about, daughter? Holly shrugged. A sad grin crept across her pale face. When such things come, you have to grasp at straws that will keep you from losing interest in life. I'm lucky to have you and Dennis. I promise not to torture you too much, not to turn into the annoying old woman your father thinks I am. I've been sitting here thinking. He's right about something. I always made sure he was well-fed, warmly clothed, rested comfortably, was surrounded by comfort. It was like a home service. I thought it was the right thing to do in a family. I didn't realize that's not what he needed. I should have thought more about myself, tried to be charming, and things might have turned out differently. Although there's no point in talking about it now. You're justifying him, then? Jane asked. To be honest, you surprise me with this habit of always blaming yourself. It's too much. I didn't tell you, but I'll tell you now. My father and I had a conversation about 3 years ago after New Year's Eve when he gave you a blender for New Year's Eve. A good blender. It still works now, nodded her daughter. But it's not a gift, it's just a thing to buy when you need it. I suddenly remembered that for every holiday your father gives you something practical and useful, everyday things. That's what I told him. He was so surprised, as if it was the first time he heard that you can give perfume and jewelry or theater tickets. some kind of spa visit. Something that would emphasize that he thinks of you as a woman, wants to see you beautiful and satisfied. But my dad didn't hear me, even took offense at me, saying that I hadn't gotten rid of my naive dreams yet. I didn't think much of it at the time. Well, I tried, but it didn't work. And now it comes to mind. And he himself was comfortable that you're so, on the care of yourself, almost no money to spend. Who needs a beautiful, well-groomed wife? He'll take care of it himself. And whoever just wants a comfortable wife, that's how he behaves. I wish Daddy would spend all his earnings on his incomparable beauty. You even cheered me up, Holly smiled confusedly. I didn't realize I had you like that. I just love you very much, and I feel bad for you. You certainly don't deserve this. All of Dennis' friends are jealous that he has such a mother-in-law. They joke that you're the reason he married me. Dad's just used to luxury care, taken it for granted all his life. He'll definitely regret it. You'll see. I don't want him to regret anything. Let him go in peace. Thank you, Jane. My kitten. Don't fight with Daddy. You're a grown-up, diplomatic man. You realize he's still your father, right? Our divorce is our divorce. But it has nothing to do with you. Besides, he's vowed to take care of your inheritance before the divorce. So I'm sure I won't change my mind and start dragging things out. Don't worry, Mommy, I won't refuse, Jane assured him with a smile, looking at her mother's palm. Just so that some monster doesn't get it. And I admire your self-control. I never realized you were so strong. Holly's tears suddenly sprang from her eyes as if an invisible dam had burst. Daughter, I don't understand myself. I wanted to scream, to beg, something like, don't leave me. Let's try to fix everything. I'll forgive everything. Forget everything. Take everything into account. Only if you stay. But something kept me back. It was a shame to cry in front of him. You're the one I trust, and I'm crying in front of you. And I'm not ashamed. Too many drunks. Not good. Not likely to show up here much. Me neither. Listen, Holly, when this dance is over, let's go and sit somewhere cozy and talk. I'd like that, shall we? Holly really wanted to get out of here. And the guy seemed serious and nice. And she'd never been asked out before, except by her girlfriends. By the end of the evening, Holly had learned a few things about the guy. He's a young specialist in railroad production, an engineer. He has his own apartment, inherited from his grandfather, but he dreams of building his own house. He's the only son of his parents, from a full family. He doesn't like discos very much either. They play pop music, but he listens to heavy rock. I don't know why he decided to see what his ex-girlfriend was doing in those places. Yeah, it's definitely an ex-girlfriend. It was a stupid idea. But at least he met her. The girl didn't think there was any interest in meeting her. She just sits there and listens to his story, saying almost nothing herself. But it seemed Ben just needed to speak up. He walked Holly home and managed to earn his mom's approval. She liked that the guy wasn't being cryptic. He waited for his mother to open the door and handed Holly to her hand in hand. Well-mannered, and not like these modern informals or hooligans. The next day, a friend, Svetlana, ran in and told her that she had seen her in the company of a new acquaintance. It turned out that Ben was just using her for a performance. He was ostentatiously courting her in front of her ex-girlfriend, Helga. She couldn't shake off her sadness for 2 whole days. On the 3rd night, there was a short ring at the door. It was Mom who opened it. She was expecting a girlfriend, but on the doorstep stood Ben with a small bouquet and a cake. From that evening, they began dating. Holly quickly fell in love with him, angry at herself for it, and tried not to think about why he really wanted her, especially since her mom comforted her, telling her not to believe the gossip. Holly listened to her mother in silence, objecting only to herself so as not to upset her. Ben, and there was nothing to compare yet. They were just meeting as friends. It was enough for her that this guy was in her life. That's how it lasted until the summer, until his birthday. It was warm days and nights, celebrating the holiday at the guy's house. There were only his parents and Ben's friend and his wife, who had just returned from a wedding trip down south. For Holly, it was a day of getting to know Ben's parents. Her mother thought it was a good sign that he was serious, and had even spent half her paycheck on a cocktail dress for her daughter. Although for the countryside it was quite possible to get by with something simpler. Holly said so to her mother. Mom was amazed to learn that her not-too-confident daughter, it turns out, is not afraid of the upcoming acquaintance. Holly's boldness was explained simply she did not believe that all this would last long. One day Ben would disappear as quickly as he had appeared. If he doesn't return to Helga, he'll meet a new love. He's too handsome and promising for her, and he probably realizes it himself. That's what the girlfriends hinted. That's what the girl herself thought. Of course, deep down she still wanted to believe that it was not them, but her mother who was right. Such a happy evening like that had never happened in her life before. She behaved as usual, just happy about Ben's holiday and her parents' love for her. Both her father and mother and her friend Roman liked her, with absolutely no effort at all. Never before had she felt such ease. The closer the day leaned toward evening, the more her confidence grew that this day was made for something special. Her parents had gone into town for the night, promising to stop by her mom's house. The newlyweds had discreetly secluded themselves in the attic that had been prepared for them, and Ben and Holly were left alone by the brazier with its almost transparent corners. Ben seemed delighted to be joined with them. He placed a bottle of expensive champagne, given to him for his birthday by his boss, on the table. All that night they spent together, and in the morning Ben, having seen his friends off, drove Holly home himself. He pulled up in front of the store, jumped out of the car, and returned 5 minutes later with a bouquet of burgundy roses. "Did you ask her to marry him?" "No, Mom, he didn't. But it was really nice. Just don't swear, or at least not today." "She will. Mom promised confidently, I can see that, and I'm not in the mood to fight today or tomorrow. Do you think your mother is a prude?" They hugged each other and laughed quietly, relieved. There was no tomorrow to look forward to. In the evening, the family of the guy in full formed on the doorstep of his and his mother's apartment. His father, putting delicacies on the table, announced that they were old-fashioned people, so they decided to ask for the girl's hand in a domestic setting. But the wedding will be already in a restaurant, and according to all the canons. Then, in the early 90s, many girls still dreamed of a chic, large and solemn wedding. But Holly was not one of them. She wanted the kind of wedding that her daughter Jane had a quarter of a century later. Light, small and elegant for those closest to her, but with a honeymoon trip that would be remembered for a lifetime. But no one had asked her opinion about her own wedding, and she hadn't even noticed. She was sitting at the table, discussing something with her mom and future mother-in-law, and couldn't believe that all this was happening to her. Her beloved Ben wants to see her as his wife. She will make sure he will never regret it. Ben hasn't felt as happy as he does now in a long time, as his divorce from his indifferent, aging wife went off like clockwork. Things had worked out much easier than he had imagined for himself. Holly had done without scandals, threats and tantrums, even without tears. Maybe she'd been living with him out of inertia for a long time too. That would absolve him of some of the guilt of abandoning his wife. And yet, it seemed hurtful, acutely hurt his ego. He considered himself the center of the world, and she was letting him go for nothing. He feared that the family had saved an unpleasant surprise for the day of the divorce, but everything was as mundane as a visit to the therapist. Spouses who have no minor children and property claims are divorced without a court. Ex-wife kept her word, given on the day of his departure no claims, if the interests of the daughter will be respected. She came to the divorce indifferent and some kind of refreshed. She looked at Ben without reproach, as at a neighbor in a cramped subway car as soon as possible to get out and make room. When they left the building, already divorced, she said goodbye indifferently and walked away, not looking like a lost and unhappy person from behind. Ben had a stupid feeling that he had not had a good time getting to know his ex-wife. Wow, now ex-wife. I wonder how long she'd been practicing that independent look. His friends called him a fool when they found out he was making a drastic change in his life. Some directly and harshly, some diplomatically. The point didn't change. He didn't even take offense because he felt right. Some of them are driven by jealousy. It's enough to show a photo of his sweetheart to ignite that envy. Someone just never had such a feeling, does not understand or has forgotten for what a man all the achievements and victories. He was like that himself. He thought it was normal to return home to his wife to grow old together imperceptibly. They just all live in hibernation, and he suddenly woke up. Dad was right in his day. Ben has never once regretted marrying Holly over the years. He had only started dating her to show Helga that he too could be looked at with the kind of adoration he looked at her with. Ben's value in her eyes didn't increase at all. But he suddenly realized that he wasn't really upset that his attitude toward Helga had long ago grown into some kind of bad habit and had let go of the obsession of the last 2 years. He was grateful to Holly for that. In her company, he felt so cozy and confident that it was very difficult, and even unnecessary, to give up this pleasant feeling. Holly did not demand anything from him, just enjoyed his company. The parents noticed the change in their son. It was impossible not to notice. He stopped being nervous and snapping for nothing, did not disappear at night, organized the regime, and remembered about the interest in work and career. Even the expression on his face was different. For 2 years they had been worried about what good could come out of their son's stupid love for a girl of easy behavior, who only wanted to sell herself more expensive. Now they were silently rejoicing, afraid to jinx the unclear prospects with questions, and were also grateful to the unknown girl. Of course, my mother did her best and made some inquiries. Ben usually avoided discussing his personal life with his father. They were too different, and his father never liked his previous choices categorically. But after his 27th birthday, when he introduced Holly to his family, he had approached, "We need to talk." The father tried to be persuasive. A little girl at almost 25. Wow, in this day and age. And no worse than that ex of yours. Mother and I notice the way she looks at you. You'll always know you're welcome home and cared for. In time, you'll appreciate that. If I were you, I'd marry her right away. You won't regret it. You'll remember my words with gratitude when I'm gone. And there'll be no escaping the whoremongers. You'll have enough for your lifetime, if you wish. And Ben got married. Dad and Mom are gone. It is unlikely that he would have been able to realize his life-changing twist if they were alive, or would have had to hide his divorce from Holly for the rest of his life. His own or his parents, they would never have understood or accepted. They loved her like their own daughter. And most surprisingly, she loved them sincerely too. Sometimes he missed his parents, but now he was relieved that his new love would not have to face the undeserved dislike of his relatives. Since there were no relatives except Jane, her daughter didn't want to meet her. She's only a few years older than you. You must have something in common. Dad, if I had to live in the same apartment with your girlfriend, I'd look for something in common with her, so I wouldn't complicate my life with negativity. I don't see the need. Sorry, we may never cross paths in our lives. I'm guessing your woman would be fine with that too. I've already agreed not to hurt your feelings or say mean things to you. And this is quite difficult for me now, and don't complicate my life even more, please. Ben understood the daughter had always been closer to her mother than to him, so there was nothing to be surprised about. But Diane was upset because she refused to meet him. I'm not even upset with myself, I'm upset with you. Your daughter does not want to make even the slightest effort to understand the feelings of her father, who did everything for her and continues to do. It's so natural to accept a gift of a share in an apartment, but to do something nice for her father is an impossible task. She was so genuinely upset that Ben had to console her for a long time, and the next day to please her with a visit to a country restaurant. She is so life-loving, so fond of pleasure, so happy at every surprise and gift, so giving her love after a day full of entertainment, that any of his sorrows pale in comparison with this happiness. Happiness is, now remembered suddenly a precise phrase read somewhere. The first 2 months of a free life. Holly struggled with her old way of life, tried to reshape it. At first she latched onto the simplest thing. Guys, why don't I come down every weekend and spend the whole day walking around and doing zines? And you two can be alone together. But the guys rejected the offer. They wanted to raise their daughter on their own. Don't be offended, we'd rather go somewhere as a family sometimes with you and Zena. The cultural program invented for her was very interesting but not happy. Holly felt like a wedding general or a dressed-up bear when her daughter or a friend brought her to the theater or to an exhibition with a new hairstyle and in new dresses. They try to entertain her, and she, unable to genuinely rejoice, walks around, red as jam. I'm ashamed of myself. Listen, it's like you're making titanic efforts on yourself. Shrewd Helly sparkled. Don't pretend for our sake. Think about what you really want for yourself. Holly confessed, and the girls convinced her to go on vacation, not to the cottage, where she was eager to help her mother Dennis grow, harvest and prepare crops, but to a real vacation. In April, Holly flew to Egypt. 10 days away from home, like on another planet. That's what she was really happy about. She did the math. She hadn't been to the sea in 12 years. She went every year with little Jane. And then Ben started building a house, and the house ate up almost all the finances. Jane had been going to the sea alone ever since, to children's and youth camps. Holly vacationed alone, avoiding noisy companies. And it didn't weigh her down in the slightest. Perhaps we should go on vacation every year. It is possible even in the off-season, and not for the beach, to walk through different old towns, through quaint markets, through narrow streets. She came back feeling completely refreshed, and immediately fell from ship to ball. It was good that there were still a few days of vacation left, while she was running around with her worldly upheavals. She completely forgot the matchmakers have a 30-year wedding anniversary. Pearl's wedding is the day after her return, and she didn't even bring a present. Just some oriental sweets and fruit teas. But the daughter who met her laughed. She knew it, and she had already bought everything from both of them. But the matchmakers celebrated the wedding at the campground. Of those invited, almost no one was surprised. Dennis's parents did not like flashy restaurants. They were natural people. Both of them were fond of fishing and long walks in beautiful places. Holly even exhaled deeply in relief when she recognized that the events did not require meticulously chosen dresses, heels, elaborate hair and makeup. She began to suddenly understand her friend Lena, who was growing weary of it all. Instead of a long morning gathering on the day of the anniversary, she properly slept, leisurely drank coffee, and gladly dressed in loose beige pants and snow-white t-shirt from Egypt, on which 3 camels dancing on the background of the pyramids. The weather is unusually warm now for April. It doesn't happen often, but you have to throw on a tight windswept hair she just let loose over her shoulders. So be it. They say women over 40 shouldn't wear their hair long. Whoever made that up, let them not wear it. And she'd completely forgotten that her honey Karen eye was so tan herself in the mirror. Holly liked her. I don't remember exactly when it started. Probably on vacation. There, some heavy lump in her chest unnoticeably dissolved, and she felt like she just liked living. Soon her children would pick her up, and her vacation would continue with a holiday at the matchmakers. Soon it would be New Year's Eve again. It seemed like just yesterday they were celebrating the previous one. It is necessary to think of gifts, to plan something interesting. But there was neither strength nor ideas. Ben was so exhausted for the last year, as he had never been tired, probably since his senior year, when he combined work with business trips and diploma. But when he'd been a kid, he'd had an easier time of it. Diane had noticed recently that he used to be a man of celebration, but now he was completely dull and boring, despite her best efforts. At the word effort, Ben even perked up because he was surprised. It seemed to him that all the efforts apply just him. Yes, and simply lives on everything ready, and he doesn't mind. But she must realize that for the eternal celebration of his strength is no longer enough. I'm not a showman. I'm the chief engineer of the project, Sonny, he joked. No, she has nothing to reproach him with. She's just too sensitive, and she's young. For her, it is important to have an eventful life, new impressions. She was counting on him to give her all that. Here I'm thinking about where to take Diane for New Year's Eve. Ben shared his thoughts with his old friend James, having stopped by his cottage for a cup of tea. I can't think of anything yet. We will fly to the Emirates in March. It has long been decided. I can't afford 2 trips in 3 months. There are some fundamental problems with the house. You've become wooden. I understand, of course, that active love makes you thin, but in your case, it's not that. You're busy, like a working housewife with 2 children, my friend said scathingly. As the owner, who didn't need to leave the house today, he'd had enough whiskey to make him want to be frank. Thanks for the support and advice, buddy, Ben said, hurt by the comparison. You're welcome. Who else will tell the truth but an old friend? Let's get back to specifics. How would you like to celebrate the new year yourself? I would have stayed at home, Ben grinned. We would invite you, Kat, and decorate the tree. We used to celebrate every year like that. What was bad? The lineup changes, James said. And we're already invited. We're not going to say no. I'm sorry. Listen, why don't you and your beauty meet at home together? I mean, you two shouldn't get bored of each other yet. Romantic areas, candles, pillows. We spent New Year's Eve at home last year because we didn't have time to book anything decent with the divorce. You know how messed up that was. And on a second gray New Year's Eve, Diane might take offense. Your problems are far from me, to be honest, James said. I don't know what to advise you. Look, what if you don't show originality and go to work? She'd be less bored and more appreciative of the pleasures of a simple vacation. Don't give me that look. I'm not suggesting that she should be hauling sleepers and sitting at the checkout and the supermarket, or even keep an eye on the sack conveyor belt. She's got some fine maiden profession. She had a life before you. She's not a schoolgirl after all. She worked in a flower boutique, I told you. I told you it was a fine profession. Give her a course for New Year's Eve to train to be a top-notch creative florist. That's what it's called, isn't it? After which she'll get a job at some cool place. I'm dead serious, by the way. Show you really care with a gift like this. It's become very difficult for friends to find common ground. Over the years, they have a lot less in common than they did when they were younger. I'll think about it, Ben said tiredly. He was not ready to distance himself from his old friend. After the meeting with James, he had planned to stop by his sick colleague's house to pick up some paperwork and discuss some things, but he suddenly decided to postpone the visit. He wanted to go home. Called, rescheduled. In the morning, I felt I'd done the right thing. I stopped by my favorite candy store and wine market. Tomorrow's Friday. What's stopping me from starting today? Driving home. He remembered that he'd forgotten to call Diane, to tell her he'd be an hour and a half early. Oh, well, it would be a surprise. The light was on in the living room, but a quiet, melodious voice could be heard from the dark veranda. It was one of her funny habits to chat with her girlfriends in the evening on the phone on the open veranda, looking only at the chain of streetlights along the highway. In the summer, it was understandable. In winter, it didn't seem too comfortable, but she assured me it was fine, throwing on her fur coat. Not to listen to my serious lover are nonsense. Shrugged her shoulders. Ben a couple or 3 times still unobtrusively overheard. He wondered what she was talking about with others, not with him. It was really insignificant girl talk, nonsense. They advised each other manicures, swimming pool, bragged about gifts. The girl appeared very content with her life in these conversations. It pleased him, and he didn't listen to them anymore. Now she was chattering to light rhythmic music and therefore did not hear or see Ben drive up. The garage was on the other side of the house. He walked along the wall toward the veranda to the voice of the sounding brook until he began to discern individual words in himself. I think of him very often right in the details. All the nicest things I imagine what would happen if I dared. And I realize he can't give me anything but that. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying, Yul. I really don't want to be a short-sighted fool who ruins everything for a nice little fling. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's why I haven't decided to see him alone yet. And I probably never will. I just hope guys aren't chasing guys these days. Maybe he'll call one more time and then stop. I can't take that chance. You're right, kitten. I'm not that good at faking it. Mine may be a little old for me, but he's reliable. Yeah, he's asking me to marry him. I'll say yes. You don't throw those options away. He'll definitely do anything for me. Not like those guys who already split a restaurant bill. Thanks, Kitty, for listening to me. I kept you late. Yeah, and I'm freezing. I'm gonna go to my cabin. Bye, 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 kisses. The door slammed as the coffin board rattled overhead. The light footsteps of the jar hushed the hallway. Ben stood, touching his forehead to the icy wall of his house. When had it gotten so cold? It had been warm not so long ago. It's a good thing she's such a chattering fool. Otherwise he'd marry her and put her in his will. I don't doubt that's the right and manly thing to do. Jane will still get the apartment, and her husband is quite a well-to-do and prosperous family, and she has only him alone. Yes, the girl convinced him of this so discreetly that he was sure it was his own decision. So she's not the fool here. He had fallen into a well-known ancient trap, like many before him, and he would not dare to enter his own house and throw her out like a mischievous cat. It was good for him to be with her. He was good with her. Even if it was self-deception. He should give her money, just to give her the money he had saved for a vacation with her in the Emirates. Isn't that a pity? She deserves it. It's just enough until she finds a job and goes back to her mom to live. She's got a place to live she won't go to waste. Or at least she'll be happy to have a spicy new romance out of wedlock. He'll call her a cab. Left alone, Ben reached for the bottle of expensive sparkling wine he had brought today. Well, let's celebrate. He had never believed in the law of the boomerang, considered it a consolation for losers. He believed that everyone gets only what they can get for themselves. The rest was mystical. No, it's not. That mysticism had a place in his real life. What did Holly feel then, listening to his phone conversation? Only a year had passed and he'd gotten his boomerang light and fast. Fate had spared him yet. He hadn't had time to marry and dump a lot of money into her welfare, and Holly had lived with him for a quarter of a century. And his fatigue was always gone. When he came home, he had all the things that make up the warm prosperity that many only dream of reaching for. He got, without the slightest effort, completely undeservedly, everything he had worked so hard to earn for the last year. His father was right. He had never regretted his choice, so reasonable, so convenient. Now there was no father, no mother, no friends. Only Holly's friends now. There was only one place left on earth he could go now, if he was accepted there. He'd do anything to be accepted. No, not now, not in this sorry state. To think things over, to sleep, to work, to find the words. He'd honestly left the keys to their shared apartment in the mailbox the day he left, so he had to wait a couple hours for Holly to get home. Ben found a parking space around the corner of a nearby office center, left the car there, and went for a walk. And she herself didn't call him either, even wished him happy birthday by text. And he didn't even give it a second thought. Nothing will make up for it. Jane can't stay mad for long, can't play Snow Queen. She's a lot like her mom. Ben realized he was drinking his third cup of espresso at the mall coffee shop. Time to go check it out. Surely the wife must have gotten home by now. Indeed, there was a light on in the living room kitchen windows. Ben hesitated in front of the intercom, but a couple of minutes later the door to the entryway opened, and out jumped a skinny old woman with a small dog and a brightly colored harness under her armpit, some subtly familiar figure from his neighbors. Ignoring the granny's condescendingly mocking glance, he entered the entryway unnoticed by himself, and found himself on his customary third floor at the light gray door, then rang the bell, which he fumbled for without looking. Holly opened almost at once. It seemed to him that at first she wanted to slam the door shut before he could get in, but then for some reason she changed her mind. She had recently returned from somewhere, probably from a party, because between her and the threshold stood a pair of dainty boots in a puddle of snow, which Ben hesitated to step over until she waved her head lightly. Come in. What happened? It was Holly, and yet completely not her at the same time. She had never been heavy-set, always just a woman of average height and build, but now she looked as light and casually graceful as a young girl. She had contrived to dye her hair a dark chocolate shade that went so well with the unusual warm color of her eyes and skin tone. And her hair was not gathered in a sleek, comfortable ponytail at the back of her head, but was loose over her shoulders in a sort of artistic mess, like in the paintings of Renaissance masters. She was wearing a simple flowing burgundy knee-length dress with a frivolous neckline, emphasizing her slender waist. One could stare at her like fire for a long time. She'd gotten 10 years younger at least since he'd left her. Anyone would say now that the woman in front of him was a beautiful, attractive woman. That's what Ben said. You've become very beautiful. Wow. Thank you, Holly replied, smiling politely, as if she had been told that every day her whole life. She paused briefly, waiting for him to say something else, but he remained silent. And then she continued softly, without irritation. Listen, Ben. If there's any important business for me, tell me at once. I'm waiting for guests. You don't call, you don't warn me. And I have my own plans. I can't give you much time right now. I'm sorry. Could you forgive me? He breathed out his question. So I have long since forgiven you, she smiled with peaceful surprise. You did not go for career in some secret society, which requires an official forgiveness of ex-wives, certified by a notary. You should only call your daughter more often. She may never admit it, but she misses you. Really? Let's get to the point. What's your reason for coming here? I want you and our family back. I want to make things right. I was an idiot. I made a dead-end mistake, and I admitted outright. I hope I didn't realize it too late, because I haven't done anything legal. I understand that you haven't been expecting this for a long time in your feminine ego. I understand that you need to take a break. Think it over calmly and tell me when I can come over. I'm really sorry things didn't work out with your young friend. You were so enthusiastic I can't bear to call you a sneak or anything like that. And it doesn't make any sense now. I have someone I love. We're adults. After my stupid prank, you had a right to get revenge. You proved to me how wrong I was in a big way. Let's just agree not to relive any of these adventures. You misunderstood me, or rather, you didn't hear me. I didn't say I wanted to prove anything to you or to myself, much less to take revenge. You should have realized after all these years that I wouldn't do such nonsense, much less go looking for a passing fancy. The woman and her daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter arrived early for the matchmaker's wedding. Dennis always left for a long journey in advance. He assured half seriously, half jokingly, that his girls would forget something and still have to go back. And then they would ask to stop 10 times to walk around and take photos in beautiful places. That's more or less how it was. But it didn't prevent the family from always arriving before the set time. Immediately, everyone went to assess the campground, chatting merrily. Zoe loved water of all kinds, shapes, and temperatures, and was already running quite well. So she had to be watched with both eyes and reacted to her ideas promptly. Zoe ran as maneuverably as bats fly, suddenly changing her trajectory. After her thoughtful vacation, Holly was a little weaned from the fast pace of life and let her guard down. In April, it was mostly roach, as far as she could remember from the stories of the matchmakers, and it seems to be caught from the shore. She didn't expect that a rubber boat would be hidden in the light between the bushes, and that her granddaughter would jump into it. Holly had a kind of stupor at any unexpected danger, and it was pointless to fight nature. And then a silent fisherman in boots materialized from somewhere. He entered the water and deftly, gently extracted the sim from the boat. She was not frightened or upset, just giggled and showed him her tongue. "Hello, take it please." The man with laughing eyes held out his granddaughter. "Thank you," Holly replied, dropping the days. And both laughed briefly, meeting each other's gazes. The fisherman had a neat short beard, highlighted by silver, hair and merry gray eyes. "Excuse us," Holly told him, and added, "For some reason we're here for a wedding anniversary. Only too early, so we get into all sorts of adventures. We're waiting for the others." "Everyone here is like that," fisherman announced, "including me. I'm Andrew, a classmate of the Happy Jubilee. It's better to go straight to Andy." She introduced herself too, and so they became a couple. From that day on, they sat next to each other at the table, talking about everything, dancing only with each other on the creaking wooden dancing terrace. No one paid any attention to it, as if it went without saying that they were a couple and everyone was used to it. It was so strange and funny, and it was like they really knew each other a long time ago. And there was no fear that they might say or do something wrong, ruin everything. Her son-in-law's mother, putting her granddaughter to bed, told her we were young almost every day to communicate, and then fate scattered us in different cities. He has lived far away for many years, and still every year he comes to us, then we to him. It's strange that you two haven't crossed paths until now. Yeah, well, we've never celebrated any anniversary this big. It was always just the two of us. I knew his wife well. Her name was Iron, too. 7 years ago, she died of a heart condition. They didn't tell anyone, but now I think that's why they didn't have children. They didn't want to risk it. Andrew was all alone, really alone. Random girlfriends are out of character for him. He needs someone to look after him. Of course, he's self-sufficient, and being alone hasn't changed him for the worse. But he's not happy about it. There's a reason we wanted to have a company wedding. Something was driving us. Looks like we're a Cupid family now. If someone had told me yesterday that I could be in this situation, I would have laughed incredulously, maybe even a little offended at being laughed at. The girl fell fast asleep, and they returned to their guests. The wedding was honored by the staunchest guests until morning. Long gone from the tables, people divided into interest groups and flocked under the shoreline canopies to bonfires or in the gazebo at the edge of the woods. Andrew walked Holly around the lake in the boat. She dozed in the pre-dawn mist. By noon, all the anniversary guests had departed, and the two of them stayed on the lake for a couple more days. Why does everyone think that roach is a bland, tasteless fish that is only good for dried fish? It was delicious, a delicacy. And then Andrew went to his place in Kaliningrad and called every day, and came for weekends twice a month. And she'd already gone to see him a few times. The last time was early December. Slow, lazy snow fell vertically along the cathedral walls. Holly had arrived wearing thin gloves, and Andrew had brought her soft woolen mittens from the market. Now, in this cold, he announced that the mittens would have to be removed for a little while. With careful tenderness, he put on her ring finger a ring with a ruby, which he had already hidden in his palm for a long time, and immediately put her hand back into the mitten. "If you agree to marry me, it's an engagement ring, and if not, it's just a gift from the heart." Back home and meeting with her daughter, telling her her news, Holly was shy and tried to appear a judicious lady, weighing the pros and cons. "I've worked at this agency for so many years. It's all its own and all its own. I know from experience how long it takes women my age to find a job in my specialty. To employers, we're like pensioners. Not everyone understands the benefits." "Mom, come on. Recruitment agencies like yours are not exclusive. How many times have you thought about changing jobs? Here's your chance. What about you two as a family?" Holly was hesitant to make another argument that should have seemed compelling. "You're used to me being the go-to guy, and if you need anything, I'm here." Argument. "I'm sorry, Mom. It's not that you and your help aren't important. It's just that you know very well that we're not helpless enough to make my young, beautiful mom a full-time grandmother. As far as our benefit is concerned, we already have a pearl couple of grandparents here, but we don't have any in other very interesting cities, and that's a shame. A happy grandmother in Kaliningrad is her own active guide on vacation. There's so much to see when Zoe grows up a bit, Mom. And actually, that's not the point at all. Would you see yourself flying right now, not touching the ground, not pretending that you care about anything more than your love right now? It's not funny at all. It's completely normal, and we're all happy for you." Holly wrote a letter of resignation and worked out her 2 weeks. She tried to see her friends more often. At least for a little while, because soon they would have to see each other less often. Today after work, she ran through the stores, browsing through farewell New Year's gifts for her colleagues, and in the evening she waited for her friend to visit. She promised to bring a familiar master of wedding hairstyles, opposed to all kinds of glamour. The friend and now argued that you can go to the wedding even in overalls, but not to build a stylish romantic hairstyle of gorgeous long hair would be a crime. And that same night, the ex-husband showed up. "I understand you were trying to escape your loneliness. Good for you. You've benefited from this incident. I mean, it's been good for both of us. You've blossomed. I've learned to appreciate what I have, not chase illusions. You know in your heart that it's not worth it to be adventurous at our age. We have too much in common. It won't be so hard for us to start over. By the way, I've almost finished the house. Just a few minor details. You'll like it. Maybe you could do some decorating tips, get involved. Well, we could live there and rent this place out. No more cramped quarters, there's views just a stone's throw away. Well, you probably remember. We'll go mushroom picking. You love mushrooms. In summer, we'll go to the sea on vacation, so no vegetable gardens. We can go together with young people or take our granddaughter, or just the two of us, to renew our feelings." "It's all gone, honey." "There's nothing to update," Holly said without a trace of gloating or irritation. "I'm grateful to you for the good things we had, for our wonderful daughter. And for this incident, as you call it, too. Before this incident, I lived and did not even know what I could be, what a man could be with me, how happiness feels. I could have lived my whole life and never known it. You must really understand me. A year ago, you said something like that. I was wrong, you see. And you're not afraid of being wrong." "I'm not," Holly smiled with quiet confidence. Ben's eyes glittered with the cold anger that had once robbed her of her will and strength, and she decided it was time to show him the door. She didn't feel like exchanging insults. They had absolutely no place in her current life. But Holly didn't have to do anything. She was saved by 4 short, cheerful rings at the door. She came in, and with her was a tall, thin girl in a cap with huge curls. "Well, meet Alona, wedding fairy, stylist. And this is our bride. Oh, and this is her ex-husband, who came to privately congratulate and wish his ex-wife happiness in her new marriage." Very modern. "Hello, Ben." The man grabbed his jacket off the rack and left the apartment without looking back. He didn't remember how he'd gotten outside, how he'd gotten home. Not far from home, he was stopped for speeding. My ex-wife left me, and I was on my way back to her. I thought she'd be happy. Forgive me. She's getting married in a year. So much for a woman's fidelity. She's a decent woman who had a home, a job, a granddaughter. What better person to talk to than anyone else? He had a desperate, sudden urge to speak out to someone he didn't know. The occasional hitchhiker effect, or whatever it's called. "Could you breathe into a tube, please?" At home, the man immediately called Jane, apologized for not calling for a long time, asked about his granddaughter, and when he could see them all. "Maybe we can go together somewhere to the water park. Or what's your daughter's favorite?" "Dad, did something happen to you?" My daughter asked right away. "Yes, daughter. I need you to be my ally. There's no one else to talk your mom out of doing something stupid. Not so long ago, you were such a romantic, putting passion above all else." Her own daughter snickered with amusement. Ben told me all about Diane. Jan is a kind, impressionable girl who likes to pretend to be cynical sometimes, so that her kindness is not overused. She listened to her father attentively and seemed to really sympathize. Then Ben began to ask her to influence his mother. She is a clever woman, and a clever man learns from other people's mistakes. And didn't she want her mother and father to be together again? "Daddy," she said softly, "let's be honest. I'm a little past the age of teenage trauma that comes with parental divorce. Your marriage is over, isn't it? Well, you could have had someone else. I'm really sorry you got one. You're not the worst kind of woman to get a woman to notice you for more than a house and a paycheck. You're still pretty good. But if Mom agreed to come back to you now, that's what I'd call a mistake. That's when I'd talk her out of it. You lived with her because she was comfortable. She deserves to be loved, not just a comfortable, good wife. And now she has that, and I wish the same for you." "I see. You get a share of the apartment. You don't need your father anymore. Right, little bitch?" He dropped the call and disconnected the phone. He didn't want to get up in the morning. When you drink alone, for some reason the hangover is always harder than after the same dose of booze in a company gathered for a fun occasion. Probably the occasion also affects. Although smart doctors do not write about it anywhere. I wanted to send a message to the general that I was ill and needed 24 hours to recover. I remembered that today was a day off, fell asleep again, and slept for another 3 hours. After a contrast shower, I slowly began to regain consciousness and turned on my phone. I was used to being in responsible positions, that I always had to be in touch. Without communication, I felt disconnected from the world, afraid of missing something. He counted 13 unanswered calls, all to Diane. He must not have been too convincing when he kicked her out of his house. He just couldn't be rude to her. She's got some kind of special talent. Girls like that get away with anything. As long as there are fools like him in the world. Ben's thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It's her again. I can't run away from her like a kid. "Just don't hang up the phone," begged a confused, melodic voice. "Just listen to me. It may be important for you too. Yeah, it's going to be hard for you to come up with something new to hook me. Trust is lost. Let's not waste time. Don't just use platitudes like I'm pregnant. Try them on your other partners." "But I'm really pregnant." The girl sobbed desperately into the phone. "And I haven't had any other partners, no one but you. Well, there were some fantasies, but I didn't fulfill them. Who hasn't? I wouldn't dare cheat on you, I know myself. I really didn't know about the baby when you kicked me out. I felt sick yesterday, nauseous. I took a test, and I found out. You can take a DNA test to make sure it's your baby." "Stop for a minute. I'm trying to get Ben to cut in. Do you want to have the baby?" "Yes, I do. It's about time. And I really want to." "Do you need financial support for the baby?" I need a father. He needs his dad. But what's the play for? I'm not acting. I really want things to work out between us. I promise I'll never lie to you. And with a baby, I won't have to do anything stupid. Mom raised Diane alone, called her princess, dressed her like a doll. She was good at sewing, worked convenient hours, and took sewing orders home. From the age of 3, she gave the girl to dance, took her to different circles. Except for dancing and singing, she showed no interest in anything. She also studied without much zeal, but went favorite with most teachers and often received a grade higher only for the charm and ability to raise the mood of the teacher. Mom saw all this, understood, and not at all upset that the daughter will not come out of Sofia Kovalevskaya or Margaret Thatcher. She clearly has a different fate, and let it be happy. The girl grew up very pretty and artistic, with a lovely dotty figure. She could have become an actress with such external data, but this requires determination, which she did not possess. She was only interested in what came her way, and the prospect of making an effort for her goal caused bouts of ennui. Yes, well, if it's so hard, we can do without it. And the only things that came into her hands were boys. A charming blonde with a beautiful figure and delicately misty, sly blue eyes imperceptibly became the center of any company, pushing aside both wittier and brighter in character girls. Her mother was afraid that her daughter would repeat her fate, spin some silly romance, imagine it to be the love of her life, and be left alone with a child. She insinuated her princess heartfelt and patiently, yes, money and connections I have no, and you do not have special abilities, the desire to achieve something to achieve. Well, no and no, what can you do? But you are beautiful and sweet, with an easy character. Everybody likes you. That's a great opportunity, too. We can't all be independent and self-sufficient. You need only once to arrange your woman's fate correctly, wisely choosing a husband who will not be a burden to you and take care of you, so that you do not spend your life in endless work, as I do. There's certainly nothing beautiful about IT. If algebra and English were given with difficulty, these suggestions of Mama's were understood with half a hint. Mom could have no fear. The daughter politely, sweetly, and even sympathetically blew off young men who could not offer a secure life. Some guys really liked, but the life of Mom and many women around her demonstrated the fact love is not for long, and then only struggle with life's problems together with someone or alone. She did not dream of conquering a real rich man, did not believe in such fairy tales. She was a very practical person. She would be satisfied with just a fairly well-to-do and firmly on his feet man, in respect of which you can be completely confident. She didn't go for casual flings so as not to spoil her reputation. It only seems like a big city, after all. By the age of 30, her experience consisted of only 2 lovers, both more or less exactly as she'd planned. In both cases, wives and underage children messed up the plans. Both wives were tenacious, unwilling to let their husbands go. They involved the whole family in the psychological treatment, blackmailed with children and division of property. OEA was losing. When she met Ben, she realized he was the one. He came to their flower boutique for an original bouquet for his boss's wife, to whom he was invited for her birthday. This is not a corporate and personal holiday for loved ones, explained a polite man in a decent suit, so that she better understood what kind of bouquet was needed. She liked the visitor, she had her principles, and was squeamish about even promising options if the man didn't seem pleasant. Now she smiled and motioned that he would definitely come again. She'd been lucky, though. His daughter turned out to be grown and married, and his wife belonged to a type she didn't understand, but not a dangerous one. And now she was lucky again. It is only necessary to behave correctly, to finally grow up and submit to young fitness instructors and other entertainment seekers. A baby's not bad either. Now that's kids she really likes. James looked at his friend with his trademark wistfully ironic grin that people sometimes took offense to, but Ben didn't care right now. What can I tell you? James pondered aloud, leaning against the bar. It's not the worst thing for you to do. The feeling of not being needed by anyone is probably much worse. Parents are gone. Ex-wife and daughter are happy without you. And then one day you're a young dad again. They say late fatherhood is the most realized. James raised his index finger admonishingly, then rubbed his forehead. What if you have a son? You've always been jealous of me having 2 boys. You'll be the favorite authoritative dad, the big boss. I'm not encouraging you to live with his mom. although that's up to you. You can't just vaporize everything. I don't believe that. And you finding out what she's really like, that's not a bad thing. Anyway, I'm staying out of it. The friend went home in a cab, and the man decided to air his head a little from the brandy heaviness through the evening city. He was a little drunk after all, but not drunk enough to fall asleep anywhere. The bar where they were meeting was in the center, not far from the station square, quite aptly decorated for New Year's Eve. Ben was drawn there for some reason, stomping through the busy crowd. It looked as if some train had recently arrived. People with luggage were coming out into the square, chatting animatedly as they greeted them. And Holly. Suddenly his ex-wife came out wearing a dainty crimson coat, looking like a girl. She was gently held by the shoulders by a tall bearded man, and a lot of people were looking at them for some reason, though they were just walking along, talking and laughing quietly. Ben stopped under a streetlight, and they saw him. "Hi," Holly said quite nonchalantly. "Hi, heard about the wedding. Congratulations. I have a son on the way." "Wow, that's great." Her companion smiled broadly and openly. "Well, congratulations to you too." "Wow, thank you. Okay, I'm off to see the family." Ben waved his hand and quickly disappeared into the crowd. Who was this slightly inebriated knight of the sad image? Andrew asked, raising one eyebrow amusedly. "My ex-husband," Holly answered. "If he's not lying, I'm happy for him. But then I'm also happy for that simpleton. I owe him a lot, after all." Ben watched them get into the cab, talking and laughing, and when they were gone, he went to the station cab driver and gave him Diane's address. Helga and Andrew were together for almost 3 years. The woman believed that marriage was almost a settled issue, because at first her beloved constantly said that in just a little while they would have free funds for a luxurious celebration. Embarrassed, Helga tried to explain that she didn't need any big celebrations. But the man, hugging her tightly, convinced everything should be perfect for my beloved girl. The best restaurant, a luxurious dress, a stunning photo shoot so that years later we can show the wedding album to our children with such speeches. Helga completely lost the ability to argue with her beloved and patiently waited for Andrew to finally decide that the accumulated funds would be enough for all his ideas. The woman sometimes felt that her partner was fooling her, but he skillfully supported her faith in a happy future. And in the end, she even defended him in front of her relatives. My mother, who moved many years ago following her new husband to the other side of the country, constantly received Helga in phone conversations and correspondence in instant messengers. "Daughter, take off your rose-colored glasses. Since your Andrew says he loves you but still doesn't want to get married, run away from him. He just settled down comfortably, living on everything he had ready, and you don't even have the right to vote to defend a modest wedding, as you want." Brother Denny prudently did not meddle in his sister's affairs. But his wife, Lily, completely agreed with her mother-in-law and convinced Helga, "Honestly, it's a pity to watch how you waste your life. Yes, it was enough for me to see how this Andrew treats you once to understand that nothing worthwhile will come of you. Besides, as far as I managed to catch, his relatives are not at all happy with you. Do you remember how many times he took you to visit your parents, Helga, and love, tried to protect Andrew?" Lily continued to persuade, citing, as it seemed to her, an ironclad argument. If they greeted you normally, you would happily go to them. To this, Helga had nothing to say. On Andrew's side, her relatives were not at all delighted with her, and the young woman was even disgusted to remember how the face of her beloved mother grimaced when she named her profession. Helen, Andrew's sister, did not remain silent and loudly asked, "So do you do a manicure?" "That's cool. I file and paint my nails all day long. Granny, can you hear?" She shouted towards the kitchen. Andrew will now always go with a manicure and pedicure, and we'll probably get it too. Helga was not shy about her work, but she was very uncomfortable. In addition, Andrew, after sitting at the table for a while, explained that he needed to make an important call and went out onto the landing. The man returned when his mother was already putting the cake on the table, and Helga was exhausted by Helen's questions and malicious jokes. She was ready to howl. She wanted to send the whole company and the women looking condescendingly at her to hell. And had the beloved stayed even a few more minutes, most likely the guest would not have been able to stand it, and told the hostesses everything she thought about their snobbery. As if to atone for his escape from the holiday dinner on the way home, Andrew was especially courteous to Helga. In general, the woman in love decided that she would not overreact to the unkind reception given to her and enjoyed the company of her loved one. A year has passed since Helga moved in with Andrew. The second year flew by, the third year was coming to an end, and no changes in social status were foreseen. Moreover, Helga began to guess that her beloved had ceased to be faithful to her. Outwardly, everything was almost the same as before, but small details gave Andrew away completely. At first, he stopped picking her up after finishing work. He made an excuse by saying that he had to stay late because of a large order. And she believed and felt sorry for the unfortunate man who has to do everything for himself and for others. He eagerly flew away with everything that was prepared for his arrival and completely stopped inviting her somewhere to unwind, as was their custom so recently. Now, after dinner, Andrew lay down on the sofa or sat near the game console to complete the next level. Helga tried to initiate joint entertainment, but it seemed that nothing could move Andrew from his favorite places at home. "Baby, I'm so exhausted," the man explained. "Give me at least a little rest. You're smart, and you understand perfectly how tired I am." Helga quietly stepped aside and went to clean, do laundry, or do some other work. Recently, it has become painful for her that upon returning home from work, Andrew was not eager as usual to hug her, but first hurried to the shower. Helga tried not to force things and not to strain the relationship, fearing that scandals would lead to a breakup. The only act that the woman did against the will of her beloved was that in the second year of living together she brought a small puppy into the apartment, at a quick glance at which it was obvious that there were many breeds among its ancestors. Can you imagine? Someone threw it in a tied bag in the trash. I threw out the trash. I hear some rustling. I thought that the rats were completely insolent and weren't afraid of anyone. And then I realized that someone inside the bag took it out, untied it, and there. Helga looked helplessly at her loved one, who was wincing from the story told to him as if from an attack of toothache, and spoke categorically. "I have nothing against animals, but you'd better take this flea-beard one to where you found it. He's scary, like some kind of hobbit." Helga objected. "He's not scary. Very charming too. The paws are so furry. Listen, let's call him Frodo." The woman gave a lot of arguments. And finally, although without much enthusiasm, Andrew agreed. The puppy remained in the apartment and grew up to the delight of Olia. She considered him her best friend, and partly caring for the baby distracted her from thoughts that it was time to give birth to a child. However, before this important event, Helga hoped to one day hear a marriage proposal. She had particular hopes for a joint vacation, which they had planned almost 6 months in advance. But suddenly Andrew changed his mind and explained. "Listen, take someone for your company and go on vacation without me. At work, the project won't be completed without me. We'll relax with you sometime later." Out of solidarity, Helga also did not go to warmer climes. Besides, she didn't want to burden Andrew with caring for Frodo. She took up household chores that everyone had never gotten around to before, tried to make the apartment cozy, and even did some minor cosmetic repairs on her own. Moreover, Andrew has long reproached the woman for the fact that the puppy she picked up caused a lot of destruction to the apartment. "This dog of yours does not bring any benefit, only losses from it. The door was scratched. Give her to a shelter. They will try to place her in a family. And if you really want to, you can play around with sponsoring this establishment a little." However, if in some ways Helga was ready to endlessly adapt to her loved one, then in the matter of the dog's place of residence she was adamant. "Frodo didn't do anything too terrible, and I won't take him to any shelter." The dog was a faithful companion in all walks, which Andrew increasingly refused to do. Helga sometimes felt that their relationship no longer resembled love at all, but represented a format of communication between the master of the house and the servants. The woman tried to find an excuse for her partner, but the end of the affair was very unexpected. About an hour after Andrew left on a business trip, the apartment door suddenly swung open, and Helga, thinking that the man had forgotten something, jumped out into the hallway in a t-shirt and short shorts and saw her beloved sister. Frodo, not too angrily, but carefully bared his teeth at the illegal guest, who brazenly opened the apartment with a spare key, and she rudely declared, taking pepper spray out of her pocket, "Come on, put the dog somewhere in the toilet, otherwise she won't find it enough. And let's go talk." Such an aggressive start to Andrew's sister's visit came as a complete surprise to Helga. However, she did not argue, and hiding the dog, invited her to go into the room. In general, we need to talk seriously, the guest announced. Mom chose an excellent match for Andrew. Profitable, unlike you. The family he ends up with will greatly help his career. And with you, he is only wasting time. So it will work for pennies. He himself does not dare to tell you about it. But he and a suitable bride have already submitted an application. There will be a wedding soon. Only he feels sorry for you, you see, and has no idea how to break this news. And there is no reason for me to start a ceremony with you. So come on, pack your things and clear the area. Leave the apartment. And don't think that you can bear everything that doesn't belong to you. I'll be watching you. Otherwise, you never know. You decide to steal something. Helga recovered from the absurdity of everything that was happening quite quickly, because she simply could not believe Helen's words and tried to shield the groom. What nonsense. I saw Andrew off an hour ago, and he said goodbye to me very warmly. Do not believe. You're right. If you want, call him and ask him directly. Helga listened to the advice and told Andrew in a few words about his sister's visit and clarified. Is it true that you are planning to marry another woman? Do I need to pack my things now, as Helen put it? The not too confident voice on the phone was the first blow for Helga. The woman sat down on a chair and heard something that instantly broke her heart. Helga, you are very good. You are the best woman in my life. But circumstances have developed so that we need to separate. Under the malicious gaze of Helen, who didn't even think about leaving the room, Helga tried not to cry, but it was impossible to hold back the tears, and she almost shouted, "Why didn't you tell me everything personally?" Andrew, who managed to collect his thoughts after the initial confusion, stopped being embarrassed and answered cheerfully. "Sorry. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about the breakup several times, but somehow I didn't want to offend you. Understand, I'm also a living person, and it's not easy for me to erase everything that happened between us." The man said something else, but Helga, putting the phone on the table, stopped listening to him. Each of his phrases felt like a dull pain in his chest, and he wanted to hide from Helen's mocking gaze. The woman, acting as if under hypnosis, began to pack her things, bitterly reflecting on the fact that the rolling suitcase she had bought for the trip had come in handy. Only now it's not a foreign voyage planned, but a move, essentially to nowhere. Helga stopped abruptly. And where did the moral strength come from? Look, I don't even have anywhere to go right now. Because with a dog, it's unlikely that I'll be able to quickly find rented housing. Give me a few days, please. I'll find an apartment where the owners will let us in, and I'll take Frodo right away. Give me at least 2 days. By the time Andrew returns, I and the dog will have already left here. However, Helen was determined. Never. You never know how you will behave. And then how can I justify myself to my brother? Come on, get ready, and don't forget your dog. Listen, why are you pretending to be a naive fool, and even trying to push for pity? You probably know that my brother has always been against animals in the apartment. Only you are a benefactor. True, at someone else's expense. From what I hear, your dog is scratching the bathroom door. Andrew is right. There are only losses from you and this flea. On a good note, we should take money from you for repairs. But I'm not petty. So fold your laundry and clothes and go ahead. Sorry, goodbye. Helga became disgusted from her own gullibility and some kind of emotional blindness. She felt deep down that Andrew had not been completely honest with her lately, but she still tried not to notice any warning bells. So I waited. The bells turned into an alarm bell from Helen's shrill voice and real betrayal from Andrew. She somehow threw things, which turned out to be not so much, into the suitcase, put an almost new down jacket into a bulky shopping bag, and picked up a bag with the remains of food for Frodo in the kitchen. She acted mechanically. She opened the bathroom, put a leash on the dog, leaving the muzzle dangling around her neck, and left the apartment where she spent almost 3 years of her life. Frodo carried a bag of food in his teeth, walking sedately, and was nearby, occasionally distracting himself to mark trees that were especially interesting to him. And Helga had no idea where they were going. Both her mother and her brother's wife warned her that Andrew was too keen on getting married, but she didn't want to hear the reasonable arguments of her relatives. The beloved constantly somehow explained the impossibility of getting married in the near future. And now, Please's sister humiliatingly kicked the girl out of the apartment. Helga understood that she was left with nothing. It was possible to try to compensate for the amount of repairs made in Andrew's apartment with her money, because he bought himself a foreign car for the occasion, but the woman did not have the slightest desire to meet with this man and members of his family anymore. Outbred Frodo as a dog that she herself fed and raised. That's all the memory of the relationship. Besides, if she had listened to Andrew, she wouldn't have had a pet. Mom has long been building her happiness on the other side of the country, and going to her, of course, is not an option at all. Only Denny remains. Helga happily found a phone in the pocket of her shorts, in which she left her ex-lover's apartment, and called her brother. Without going into details, the woman asked, "Hello, can I stay with Frodo today?" The brother, sensing something was wrong in his younger sister's voice, immediately agreed and suggested, "Where are you now?" "I'm somewhere in your area on business. Maybe I should grab you and the dog?" Helga happily accepted her brother's offer and named the cafe where she often met with Lilia and her nephews as a landmark. Andrew categorically did not want her relatives to visit his apartment, and now the woman clearly saw in this behavior the frivolity of her former roommate's intentions. The daughter-in-law did not have to wait long. In the back seat of the family car and child car seats were nephews, the eldest, 7-year-old Max, and the youngest, 1-year-old George, who joyfully waved their hands to their beloved aunt and dog. Lily immediately understood from the tear-stained eyes of her husband's sister what had happened, and opening the trunk to help put a few belongings there, Helga casually remarked, "I won't even remind you that I warned you about the vile nature of your Andrew. I'll just say I'm very glad that you woke up. It was high time to end this relationship. Rejoice in your freedom, and do not be sad for someone who is not worthy of you. He's not worth your little finger." A drone and a weakling. Helga sat in the front seat. Frodo managed to sit at the feet of his hostess, very compactly for his size, and soon the whole company was already accommodated in the small apartment of Denny and Lily. Helga understood that in a family with 2 children growing up, she and her dog would greatly displace the owners, and she started calling colleagues from the salon where she worked. However, no one had relatives or acquaintances who could rent out the corner for an acceptable price. Anne's boss, however, offered an option, but the owner of the apartment asked for such a high rental price that, if she agreed to it, she simply would not have anything to live on. Max fussed with Frodo, showing his younger brother how joyfully the dog alternately gave paws, as if playing. And the 2 women watching this sweet picture smiled synchronously. Helga shrugged guiltily. "Sorry, Lily, but it looks like you won't be able to find an apartment quickly." Not even a shadow of irritation or dissatisfaction flashed on Lily's face. On the contrary, she suggested, as if making excuses, "Helga, if you don't mind, let's put you and Frodo on the balcony for now. It's warm now, and there's already a cot there. I myself enjoy watching the city there in the evenings. It will probably be a little inconvenient, but there is generally not enough space in the kitchen." There was a table with a refrigerator. They could barely fit it in. It's a pity that we haven't had time to expand our living conditions yet, but now there will be an incentive to move more actively. Then there will be enough space for everyone. Denny, who came home from work in the evening, suggested that his sister talk to Andrew like a man, but Helga flatly refused. "No, don't. You'll find more problems on your own. Let him live as he wants." Albeit cramped, but not offended, Helga spent the night in her brother's apartment, although she understood that the option of walking from the balcony through the master's bedroom to take the dog for a walk in the morning was not at all convenient. After breakfast, Lily suddenly turned to Olya with a strange question. "Actually, what keeps you in this area? You can find a job anywhere in the city." Helga shrugged. "The owner, Alice, has a chain of salons. She sometimes allows us to change locations due to relocation or when there is a vacancy." The daughter-in-law almost clapped her hands. "Look, I think I know what to do. My aunt left me with a house on the outskirts of the city, with all the amenities, by the way. Of course, no one has lived there since the winter, and a general cleaning will probably be required, but this is the normal way out of the situation. You ask your boss if she has a salon in that area and if there is free space in it, and I think everything will just work out wonderfully. Fresh air. The dog, again, is free. We will visit you. It will be really cool in the summer. I can even move there with the boys." Denny strongly supported his wife's idea. "Lily, but you're right. Really, how did this not occur to me?" Helga doubted that the boss would meet her halfway, but the idea was indeed a good one. The woman decided that she was not risking anything, even if Alice could not transfer her to another salon. You can at least try to live in Lee's house, find money, and go to work. Even if you have to leave early, the issue of housing will be resolved. And now for Helga and her pet, this was the most important thing. The conversation with Alice did not bring any positive results. However, the owner of the salon chain promised, "Helga, you are in good standing with me. So as soon as I think about opening a point in that area, I already know who I'll invite to work there. But for now, I need you here. I think there is no reason for you to leave me, since getting a new job is always problematic. You understand that I do not accept lateness. So please plan your route to work so as not to keep our visitors waiting." Fine. Olia had no choice but to agree. As a result, the woman's spring and summer were filled with numerous worries, which were mainly associated with the need to travel almost an hour one way from her temporary shelter to her place of work. It's good that thanks to Lily's friendliness and sincerity, Helga did not feel awkward. On the contrary, when the daughter-in-law and her sons, as promised, came to live in a private house, the woman became much happier. Frodo, who attracted boys like a magnet, was also not bored while his mistress was away. Denny and Lily were finally able to get a larger apartment with the help of government payments, and Helga happily tried to repay their relatives for their kind attitude. The woman, when she could, worked with her nephews and also participated in the renovation process. Maybe it wasn't always easy to manage the active Max and Alex, who had just recently learned to walk and was diligently looking for a way to give himself a bruise, but there was finally no time to think about the unpleasant separation. Lily introduced Helga to neighbors whom she had known since her childhood, and she had a good relationship with almost everyone. As a result, the abandoned woman even gained a small clientele. Even though the part-time work was not too significant and was sometimes even expressed in natural products, it increased Helga's self-esteem. However, she did not always try to bend to what her neighbors told her when they came for manicures. The woman cared little about the opinions of those around her, who, seeing how the dog lived calmly in the house, Frodo was given a personal chair, and he, having a not at all evil disposition, limited himself to attentive observation of everything that was happening around him, said Ook. "Keep the dog in the house." The neighbor on the left, Jane, was indignant when she came in to get her nails in order. "Look, there's a booth in the yard. Put it on a chain, and that's it. It'll be more useful. Why are you feeding him in vain?" Helga was not offended by such talk. Frodo was her true friend, and it was useless to convince a fully grown lady of anything. In addition, the dog turned out to be an excellent companion for the boys, which means that it was necessary to take special care of its cleanliness, and all advice to place the dog on the street was completely ignored. Thanks to the increasing flow of acquaintances who decided to get a manicure from her, the abandoned woman realized that her skills were in demand, and she, especially given the support of her relatives, would not be lost. Helga tried not to remember or think about Andrew. She even began to succeed. Denny was happy for his sister, who now looked much better than on the day when, with eyes reddened from tears, she appeared on the threshold of his old family nest. Lily was also happy that the girl had finally learned to smile again. Closer to autumn, Lily and her children returned to a new apartment, where quite pleasant renovations had already been made. It was time for the eldest nephew to get ready for school and explore a new territory, the desk, where he had to learn his lessons. Lily asked straightforwardly, "What, Helga, are you staying, or will you move with us? Now there is enough space for everyone, and it will be closer to work. It's a shame to spend so much time on the road." Max intervened in the conversation between the adults and said, "There will definitely be enough for everyone, and you will help me with my homework, it's true." However, Helga refused the proposal from her relatives. "If possible, I will stay here. I really liked it here. And Frodo is better here." Denny, without insisting, still told his sister, "If you get bored or sad, just let us know. We will pick you and Frodo up immediately." Agreed? Helga hugged her family one by one and promised, "If anything happens, I'll definitely tell you." "Thank you." Whenever possible, Helga came to visit her brother when her help was needed, but she always finally refused the offer to move into an apartment, saying that she and the dog were much calmer in nature. The woman did not yet suspect that soon the calm period of her life would come to an unexpected end. Golden autumn flashed by. And then, obeying the eternal law of nature, bright white snow fell to the ground and everything became gloomy. The frost has already firmly grabbed all the puddles and turned the off-road conditions on the roadway into miniature mountain ranges. Helga now had to wake up even earlier to get to work on time. But the slightly shifted regime did not bother her much. Life on the outskirts of the city seemed to come to a standstill as darkness fell. Sometimes, of course, there were noisy cars whizzing by and dogs doing roll call, but overall the area was quiet and calm. Helga liked everything here, and her pet clearly enjoyed this lifestyle. One night, Frodo suddenly began to behave strangely. He worriedly, which was something exceptional for him, touched the mistress's hand with his cold, wet nose, sliding his claws along the floor, running from the door to Helga's bed. Without waiting for dawn, the owner could not stand it and decided to take the pet out for a walk. The woman became worried, what if the dog ate some kind of poison? So, we need to see how the dog behaves on the street. And sighing, Helga quickly pulled on her sweatpants and put her feet in her sneakers. Putting on her jacket, she thought that it was time to prepare winter shoes. There was hardly anything comfortable in the local store. This means that after work, you need to walk around the city's shopping centers and look for new clothes. In addition, it would be a good idea to visit construction stores and consider the option of insulating the veranda. If you approach the matter wisely, then you will get a good winter refrigerator. And in warmer seasons, the veranda can become an additional room. Of course, this idea had to be discussed with Lilia and her brother, but first we needed to at least roughly estimate how much it would cost to implement the bold idea. The dog stomped fussily at the threshold, distracting him from his thoughts, and Helga hurried to open the door. The miracle never happened. The snow never fell. The sky was overcast and quite dark. In the bright light of the lantern, the familiar courtyard looked unusual, and even somehow mysterious. Frodo immediately rushed to the apple tree that grew near the gate and began to bark, and then whined softly. Approaching, Helga saw a package lying under a tree. It only took a split second to understand that someone had thrown a small child into the yard. The woman grabbed the bundle and hurried into the saving warmth of the house, mentally reproaching herself for not immediately taking the dog outside, which clearly sensed the foundling. In the room, Helga, who had gained experience in handling small children by helping her daughter-in-law care for Denny, unwrapped the blanket and realized that it was time to change the swaddle for the girl lying in front of her. It was very fortunate that Lily left some of her son's things in the house. Therefore, there were no problems getting the little one in order. But what to do now with such a find? Helga shook the blanket to hang it on the radiator, and a note printed on the printer suddenly fell out of the lining. "I'm scared to leave my daughter to the mercy of fate, but there is no other option. Believe me, I have a compelling, almost justifiable reason for doing what I do. Take care of my girl. Heaven bless my little one and you." Helga felt uneasy. It was all very strange. It seemed that the words were sincere, but this in no way connected in the woman's mind with the cruelty of the act. It turns out that the person who dropped the child off deliberately took a risk for the baby's health by leaving her on the street rather than dropping her off in some warmer place. What if Frodo had not asked to leave? Or if she hadn't released it? Lilia became scared. But it was necessary to act, and urgently, even if it was night outside. The woman wanted to warm the milk, but was afraid that the child might have an allergy, so she decided to call an ambulance, doctors, and the police. The dispatcher, we must give her credit, sent a team very quickly. The doctors examined the baby and shook their heads when they heard Helga's confused explanations that she had found the child and did not know what to do with him. The paramedic, a middle-aged woman, advised, "We, of course, can now take the baby to a children's hospital, but, to be honest, there are no special indications for this. The girl is about 6 to 7 months old, judging by her development and external condition. She lived in good conditions. She was clearly well looked after, and being in the frosty air did not have time to harm her. Your dog seemed to sense something was wrong almost immediately, and the girl didn't even get hypothermic, fortunately. If possible, wait for the police. Actually, I have no right to say this, but the later the child ends up in a government institution, the better, in my opinion, it will be. You can give your baby warm water from a spoon. If you have zucchini, cook it and puree it. Try to give a treat if suddenly the child begins to cough, sneeze, or any other symptoms appear. Do not engage in amateur activities and call the team. You never know what we missed during the inspection. All clear?" Helga nodded her head, thinking that it looked like she would have to take time off from work today to wait for the police, because bothering Lily and asking her to come was not an option. Not only does the daughter-in-law have to take Max to school in the morning, but she also has to drag Denny across the city. Having seen off the ambulance crew, Helga, under the attentive gaze of the dog, took the girl he had found in her arms and began to rock her. Once upon a time, a woman really wanted to give birth to a child for her beloved Andrew, but the implementation of the idea somehow kept getting postponed. Only now suddenly there was such a wave of tenderness towards a defenseless creature. However, the thought of keeping the child did not arise. As soon as the morning came into its own, the woman warned Alice that she would not be able to come to work, and after listening to the boss's grumbling, for the first time she seriously thought about leaving the salon. The policeman came when the clock was already approaching noon, and immediately began asking Helga about all the circumstances of the case. The woman openly explained that she discovered the child in time only thanks to Frodo. "It's good that he raised me. The baby could have frozen if it weren't for him. Doctors said she was completely healthy and was receiving good care." Fyodor, having studied the note, put it in a bag, patted the smart dog on his wide head, and then clarified. "Well, if the doctors said that everything is fine, then I'm sending your find to the baby home." Swallowing the lump that suddenly appeared in her throat, Helga answered in monosyllables. Yes. Deep down in her heart, she felt sorry for the girl. But the woman believed that at that moment she was doing the only right thing. Soon after the formalities were settled, representatives of the relevant police department appeared at the house, and the district police officer briefly explained to them what had happened. The found baby was taken away, thanking Helga for her concern, and the woman finally relaxed. Having treated Frodo to meat, she began to clean up the house, although it was not dirty. I just wanted to do something, and not sit, immersed in sad thoughts about the fate of the girl. However, it didn't take long to clean up. Jane came to visit, who, as it turned out a little later, was a good friend of Fedor's wife, and was already privy to the details of everything that happened at night and in the morning. The neighbor began to lament. Yesterday I spent the night with my daughter. And here on our street I missed such an event. As a friend told me that a foundling had been found, my heart almost stopped. What kind of mother could do such a thing, cuckoo? There are no other words. It's necessary to leave a child in the cold. Ugh. The woman, having spoken, reached into her bag, took out a package, and handed it to the surprised Helga, explaining, "I collected this for your hero." Looking at him, I scolded him and called him a parasite. And it turns out he saved the child. After sitting a little longer and discussing the details of the unusual incident several times, Jane got ready to go home, saying, "Now the times have come. It seems like everything is in bulk, and the children are thrown away like some kind of garbage. Being in an orphanage is like a punishment without guilt. No matter what anyone says, life there is not easy. I know it for myself." The woman fell silent and, brushing away uninvited tears, said goodbye to Helga and left. Frodo looked with an understanding look, as if he was looking into the depths of his owner's soul, and she admitted to the dog, "Imagine, I think I would like the girl you found to stay with us. Why, you get along great with children. And I'm already at such an age that it's high time to become a mother. You and I worked out our practice on children excellently, in my opinion. So they could definitely handle one girl." By chance, or perhaps truly understanding the mistress, Frodo winked, and the touched woman hugged her faithful dog. During an evening conversation, Helga told her daughter-in-law about the girl she had found and asked, "You seem to have mentioned once that one of your classmates is raising a foster child. Maybe you happen to know how the adoption procedure goes?" Lily, it turned out, was not too surprised by the question and promised to find out all the important nuances. The next day, Helga came to work and tried to act as if nothing unusual had happened the day before. However, my thoughts stubbornly returned to the found baby and everything connected with her. Helga did not understand what reason could be good enough to abandon a child on the street in the cold. And she was so immersed in her thoughts that, while working on the nails of one of the regular visitors, she incorrectly answered the questions asked and almost ruined the drawing. As luck would have it, the owner was in the salon that day, who noted the insecure work of the master and, after the client left, invited Helga to a conversation in her small office. "What kind of nonsense have you allowed yourself to eat? Yesterday I didn't go out at all, but today it's like you're holding instruments in your hands for the first time. I understand everything. There may be personal problems. We are all human. But when troubles begin to affect the quality of work, this is unacceptable. Nowadays there is such competition among nail service professionals that there is simply no right to make mistakes and send visitors away not completely satisfied. So Helga, I want to get an honest answer from you to a direct question. Will you be able to cope with your emotions and work normally? Or should I look for another master at the salon? Helga had to briefly brief her boss on what had happened, and she unexpectedly softened her tone. Oh, well, I would have explained it right away. Helping a child is sacred. I thought it was a sin that you were walking. She doesn't seem like a frivolous person, but you never know what happens in life. But still, Helga, pull yourself together. You did everything you could, and you have nothing to reproach yourself with. Unexpectedly, Helga opened up. You know, I gave the girl to the specialists, it seems, but my heart is restless. I feel some kind of responsibility or something. The insightful Alice clarified. Aren't you going to adopt her? Keep in mind, this is not taking a dog or a kitten into the house. The hassle is many times greater. True, the return is incomparable, but you need to think about everything extremely seriously. I'll tell you in advance, so that there is no misunderstanding between us. I won't put you on maternity leave. You understand, this is not my practice. But at home, as far as I understand, things are slowly going well for you. Yes, I'll be sorry to part with you, but I won't keep my place for you. No offense, of course. There is constant turnover in salons. There is no escape from it. So maybe it will be possible to find a job for you with a break, but I won't make any promises. In general, your decision should be fully informed. There was a knock on the boss's office. Administrator Lena came in and apologized and said, Alice. There, the visitor arrived a little earlier than she had been booked in, and behaved rather nervously. I offered her coffee, but she insists that she get a manicure as soon as possible, as if she expected us to lay out the red carpet for her and greet her with applause. But suddenly they offered her food. Alice, dissatisfied and gloomily, besieged the administrator. Keep your thoughts about visitors to yourself, it will be better. Turning her head to Helga, the boss summed up the conversation. I think you understood what I said. Then go and work. Helga hurried to her workplace and got down to business that brought her both money and pleasure. She appreciated Alice's frankness, which gave a complete picture of the prospects in connection with the likely changes, and decided to really think through her idea of adopting the found girl in every detail. In the evening, Helga's brother's family came to visit Helga and her faithful Frodo. The joyful boys were busy with the dog, who was happy about the return of the children, whom he considered his charges, and tolerated all signs of attention from them. At this time, the adults were discussing the details of the incident. Denny, looking straight into his sister's eyes, asked, Helga, as I understand it, you regret that the girl ended up in a state-owned house and would like to adopt her. You've always had a kind heart, but don't you think this is too much? You, of course, have experience communicating with Max and Alex. But that doesn't mean anything. Who knows what problems the baby will have? Lily echoed her husband and provided valuable information. Adoption is not a simple procedure at all. The documents required are through the roof. When my friend read out the list, my hair stood on end. I briefly outlined the situation and realized that it was not in vain. A friend who passed through the bureaucratic cordon immediately explained that you have at least 3 complicating circumstances at once. First of all, you are not married. And although according to the law this is not a basis for refusing adoption, in reality it may be considered that this is not in favor of the child. Secondly, you want to adopt a specific girl. In general, it turns out that there is a waiting list for small, healthy children. It may well turn out that by the time you collect all the necessary information, the girl will already be in the family. Thirdly, although in fact this is the most important, you don't have the necessary space of your own. George, and the share in our apartment will most likely not be enough. Noticing that Helga was sad, Lily rushed to support her. If you are firmly ready to fight for the girl, then Denny and I consulted and decided that I could issue you a deed of gift for this house. Seeing that his sister was about to burst into tears with emotion, Denny hastened to defuse the situation. However, as an option, you can urgently find a groom without material and housing problems and quickly get married. So 2 out of 2 problems will be solved with one graceful act, at least formalizing the fake marriage. Helga smiled through her tears. Well, this is some kind of fantastic option. It seems to me that it is absurd to count on him. Lily agreed. It's easier to become the mistress of this house anyway. I would never dare to give it into the wrong hands, and so he will actually remain in the family. I think my aunt would be happy. Having officially received a complete list of documents required for adoption, Helga began to obtain all the necessary certificates. She learned the wisdom at the school of foster parents, ran to doctors to pass a medical examination, visited various offices, and took a reference from her boss and a certificate of income. In addition, at the prompting of Lily and a friend, Helga asked the policeman to write a petition with a brief history of the discovery of the child, and Fedor did not refuse. In addition, thanks to a good relationship with the wife of the district police officer, he, in some unknown way, contributed to the fact that Helga was allowed to visit the found girl in the baby's home. Communication with the baby, who was named Diane, became a real miracle for the woman. She held the girl in her arms and was touched. Emotions were reflected on the small face. Even when Diane frowned or began to grunt with displeasure, Helga admired the baby. The nannies were accustomed to visits from the woman, who brought things not only for her pet, but also for other children, and sometimes they allowed her to stay with the girl longer. Although many employees have experienced some burnout over the many years of work at the baby house, they could not help but be happy that Diane, it seems, will soon find her mother. Every time Helga met a neighbor on the street, she sincerely thanked her for her help and support and offered to give her, her daughter, and her granddaughter a free manicure. Jane, they waved it off. Come on, Helga. How can I stay on the sidelines when there is practically a struggle for a child right next to me? I cannot. Let the girl have a chance to quickly become your daughter. No one deserves to end up in an orphanage, and I will help in any way I can. Thank God I have lived in the world and understand people. Fedor is a normal guy. My wife told him what kind of person you were, and that was enough for him. In general, don't worry and don't make things up. We'll have to contact you, but not for free. The money will still be useful to you. Jane and everyone who was aware of the situation tried to support her. Denny and Lily brought children's clothes, which were too small for Max and Ilya, but were in almost perfect condition. The colors, of course, are not particularly girlish, but everything is good. And the Helga ska is very maneuverable and light. Helga did not know how to thank her brother, and especially her daughter-in-law, who provided her with housing and with a generous gesture turned her into a well-to-do lady. Now the inspectors had no chance to reproach the woman for not being able to provide her adopted daughter with decent living conditions. Having run around and collected a set of necessary documents, Helga, with a restless heart, went to the guardianship and trusteeship department. The woman sincerely spoke about her experiences about the found girl, and that contact had already been established between them. Diane is happy when she sees me, smiles, wanders with her eyes, follows me when I leave. And in general, from the first moment, when I took her in my arms on a frosty night, I had the feeling that Diane was my blood. I may not have given birth to her, but I feel a real kinship with her. However, the story did not touch the hearts of strict officials one bit. I don't think that your decision to adopt a child is serious. I understand that you are single now, but you might meet a man. And what then? What if he doesn't need your daughter? What decision will you make then? Will you hand her back like a boring toy and stay with a man? And years later, will you constantly reproach your daughter for not building your own feminine happiness because of her? I think you need to think again. It will be better for everyone. People who have experienced severe loss spend years mulling over the decision to adopt a child. And you just decided since you found it, then the girl should a priori belong to you. This is strange, don't you think? The woman still said something, but Helga, stunned by the refusal, no longer understood much of the meaning of her phrases. There was a noise in her head, and after awkwardly saying goodbye, she left the office because it was the turn of other applicants. As promised, Helga called Lily and told her about the negative result of her visit to the guardianship and trusteeship department. The daughter-in-law supported. My friend warned me that most likely I would have to go through a trial, but don't be afraid, this is normal practice. By the way, think again, maybe you were really excited? Try to deal with your desire without unnecessary emotions, because this is a very big responsibility. Helga said wearily. Yes, as much as I was thinking, I hardly sleep at night, almost without a break. I think around the clock whether I can give poor Diane the real motherly love and care she deserves. So far, my opinion is clear. She will definitely be better off in a family than in a government institution, where the staff most likely does not have enough time for such poor fellows. The employees there are good, but they can't give in to everyone. Well then, don't be sad. Let's use all our resources and victory will be ours. The conversation calmed Helga down quite a bit, and although she was afraid that insomnia would overcome her again that night, she fell asleep almost immediately after returning home and walking with Frodo. The woman even forgot about food. And it's good that the alarm clock on the smartphone was set in advance for the required time of getting up. However, this precaution was even unnecessary. The faithful dog, obeying some natural feeling, woke up the owner a few minutes before the nasty bell rang. Helga had to tell Alice about the failure, and the boss surprisingly provided her subordinate with moral support. I admit, I somehow admire your determination to fight for a girl you don't know. It's a pity that your running around the authorities has so far been without result. After all, as far as I understand, this means that the schedule will have to be rearranged again. Well, nothing. I think the girls will cooperate. I have plans to open a location in the area where you live, and as soon as all the formalities are ready, they will transfer you there. I warn you right away, the salary at first may be less than here, but I think there are prospects for improvement. Helga, inspired by the support of her boss, went to her workplace. A transfer to a new location could actually make her life much easier and save valuable time that she is currently spending on the road. However, for now it was necessary to act precisely in the circumstances that prevailed at the moment. Helga, whose income had noticeably decreased while running around various authorities, tried to save money, but still could not deny herself the pleasure of looking into the children's departments whenever possible to look for things for her future daughter. She had no doubt that, even through court, or even several court hearings, she would be able to achieve her goal. Once, in a special department located in a large shopping center, a woman, turning into an aisle with toys, almost collided head-on with her ex. Andrew was noticeably embarrassed and tried to hide his emotions behind a cheeky tone. "Hello, what fate are you? Are you picking up anything for your nephews? Or is there something I don't know about you?" The man, following his habit, smoothed his hair with his palm, and Helga noticed the sparkling rim of a brand new wedding ring on his finger. The meeting with her former roommate stirred resentment in Helga's soul, and she did not even try to answer him politely. "Why do you need to know anything about me?" With the hands of his sister, he threw me out of the apartment into which I, like some fool, invested money. And now one might think you are interested in something? Go somewhere your own way, and don't stand in my way. Andrew was taken aback. He did not expect such a rebuke from Helga, who, from her experience living together, was distinguished by meekness, tenderness, and a tendency to compromise. A man who married out of pure convenience and fell under the control of a strict wife has already regretted that he followed the lead of his family and entered into this profitable, but clearly unhappy marriage. The years spent with Helga now seemed to him the most golden time of his life. He would not mind restoring a relationship with her and receiving love and understanding from his former partner, although he was worried about how to do everything so that his legal wife would not know about the affair. Andrew understood that in this case the costs of marriage would most likely be in vain, but whoever doesn't take risks, as you know, doesn't drink champagne. Thinking quickly, the man tried to soften his impression. "Sorry, Helga. I still think that you are the best thing that has happened to me in this life. Please forgive me for hurting you. I was wrong, and I wish I could go back in time and do things differently. But unfortunately, no one has yet invented a time machine." Andrew joked, trying to evoke positive emotions in his ex. But Helga grimaced as if she had bitten off a slice of lemon and admitted, "Andrew, I was also mistaken. It was not worth wasting time on you and money on your apartment. These funds would be very useful to me now. But what can we do now? Just spit and move on with your life. Okay, no need to waste my time again. Goodbye." Andrew tried to tell Helga something else, but she hastily left the department, and he did not dare to follow her. However, it seemed to him that he still had a chance to get his modest mistress back. After thinking a little, the man deposited money on Olia's card in the amount of about 2 of her salaries, hoping that this would begin their dialogue. He imagined how the proud woman would return the amount to him, and then gradually they would begin to communicate. But Andrew miscalculated. Helga really needed the money. And having received a message about their receipts, she immediately rushed to hire a good lawyer to conduct the trial. Lily helped find the specialist, who in turn learned about him from her friend who had gone through this unpleasant process. Surprisingly, the amount received was definitely enough for the fee. Helga saw this as a very good sign and was not mistaken. The lawyer brilliantly defended the interests of her and the found baby. At the beginning of the summer, after almost 8 months of struggle for Diane, the girl was officially recognized as her daughter, and a completely new stage in their lives began. Alice, whose opening of a new salon was delayed, suggested that the employee go on paid leave for the first time. This, of course, is not a decree, but I think everything will be resolved successfully soon. You will be able to find a nanny for the girl while you work. Helga smiled happily. Thank you very much, Alice. I have so many helpers. Just a miracle. The daughter-in-law and the boys have arrived for the summer, and the neighbors are vying with each other to offer help. The stern boss smiled. Well, that's just wonderful. So, as soon as there is news, I will call you about the arrival of little Diane home. Helga organized a small celebration for the closest people who provided great support on the way to the goal. In addition to her brother and family, Jane and the district police officer along with her wife were invited. Those gathered tried not to make noise, and Max and George, in the company of their tailed friend, were almost constantly in the room where their new relative was quietly sleeping in the crib. Helga warmly thanked everyone who helped in her difficult task. Consider this a little belated gift, but what a gift. Now you have a daughter, and she has you. I wish you both good health, and so that you always understand each other and be happy. After a pleasant evening, Helga, her brother's family, and little Diane remained in the house. The smart dog lay down not in his favorite chair, but right next to the baby's crib. Max ran to the adults and showed them this touching picture. Look, Diane now has a personal nanny. Lily hugged her son tenderly. Frodo guarded you and your brother. And while talking with you, I realized how to treat children. It's quite normal that he took the baby under his wing. Such a smart dog is simply not capable of doing anything differently. With the advent of her adopted daughter, Helga seemed to have a second wind. Lily sometimes jokingly said, "Listen, it seems like you don't even need help. You get up before everyone else, have time to clean the house and take care of the boys and daughter. It's like I'm relaxing here at a resort." Although at the stage of collecting documents for adoption, people who knew about the situation tried to warn Helga and repeatedly tried to tell her that the girl may have hidden pathologies. The fears turned out to be unfounded. That's what the old paramedic said. The baby received excellent care right up until the moment she was thrown onto the street. The girl grew up and had practically no serious illnesses, so ordinary childhood ailments. And in terms of intelligence with age, she could give a head start not only to Ilya, but also to Max. The issue with work was also resolved perfectly. Alice managed to open a new salon, where she invited Helga to work. The journey from home to work and back now took very little time, and the woman was completely happy. One day Andrew called her, and in a trembling voice began to invite her on a romantic date. And Helga, listening to her former roommate, wondered how she could even fall in love with him. After saying goodbye and pressing end, she blocked the number that she once knew by heart and felt that she had now truly turned the page on the past completely. Even if Andrew turned out to be not entirely a scoundrel and transferred money for the repairs made, the woman still did not want to communicate with him. She had already spent part of her life on him and no longer wanted to give him even a few minutes. 5 years flew by unnoticed. Diane grew up smart and affectionate, refuting all doubts about bad heredity from the parents who abandoned her. Watching the girl reach for knowledge, Helga decided to enroll her daughter in preparatory courses at school. The meeting for parents had already passed, and the woman and Diane even managed to buy all the stationery that the teacher recommended. The first lesson was supposed to take place in a week. Changes were coming, but Helga still had no idea how large-scale they would be. In the meantime, we could enjoy the still warm evenings of the coming autumn. Twilight was in no hurry to drive away the daylight, and the woman, without fear, let her daughter walk in the yard in the company of Frodo. Helga had no doubt about the dog's prudence. And even if Diane had planned a dangerous prank, her faithful bodyguard would have prevented any trouble. One day, looking out the window, a woman saw her Diane talking with an unfamiliar man. The dog stood between the interlocutors, blocking the little mistress, but Helga's heart pinched unpleasantly. Anticipating danger, she hurriedly went down the steps of the stairs, stood next to the dog, the daughter of a stranger, and warily asked, "Good evening. Did you want something? Are you looking for someone?" The man, looking up from his careful examination of Diane, looked up at the woman and, trying not to scare anyone, said hello, introduced himself and explained. Good evening. I'm Justin. Have you heard of such an entrepreneur from the neighboring region? Helga shook her head and the man continued. Apparently I need to talk with you about the events of almost 6 years ago. It so happens that it seems that you have perfectly solved the problem that you acquired because of a person close to me. There can be no excuse for what happened in the past. And I am indebted to you forever. Helga's legs almost gave way. She realized that the man had a direct relationship with the girl whom she raised as her own daughter, and frantically wondered what to do and how not to scare the little girl with unexpected information. Unable to think of anything better, the woman asked Diane, "Daughter, take the apples and take them to your grandmother together with Frodo. Sit there and entertain her a little." Otherwise, she complained that her relatives had not come to visit for a long time. "Play something, and in the meantime, I'll talk to our guest. Don't rush home. I'll come for you myself." The girl looked sternly at the man and asked with narrowed eyes, "And you won't offend my mother?" Justin put his hand to his heart and promised, "I won't offend you for anything." Diane hesitated for a few seconds, and then turned to the dog. "Frodo, let's go to Grandma. I'll just carry the apples, otherwise I know you. You won't be able to carry half of them." The dog, who adored his owner, only waved his tail in response. Helga watched Diane and dog go out the gate and invited an unexpected visitor. "Why are we standing on the street? Let's at least go to the veranda. Otherwise I feel the conversation will be long." There was a table and chairs on Helga's veranda, and the woman suggested, "Sit down and tell me. Otherwise my nerves are already on edge." The man did not refuse the offer, and sitting on a chair, told a story that made Helga feel uncomfortable. "In the past, my family and I lived in a neighboring state, 300 kilometers from your town. My wife, Margaret, gave birth to my daughter, Dorothy. Beautiful, healthy. I tried to make life easier for the woman I love. We also had an au pair. She did the cleaning and cooking. More precisely, she was an old friend of my mother and practically part of our family. This woman raised me and treated me, if not like a son, then like an adored nephew. Aunt Isabel and Margaret received her very warmly, and she really doted on her daughter. Everything was great. Both the house and the business are well promoted, and with prospects for development right up to the capital. In general, I was so successful that my competitors decided to destroy me, not physically. No, not at all. On the other hand, they approached him in order to hit him harder. They wanted to trample him mentally. And for me, this was worse than death. As I found out completely after the fact, a person was hired who studied all the information about my wife, found an approach to her, and then began a secret affair with her. It's probably a banal story. But being in this whole situation is so disgusting that all the comedy is not even felt. I would almost not blame my wife for her affair, if not for the sad consequences. One day I received photographs by email in which my wife and a man I didn't know were having fun. At first I just wanted to break her neck, but I pulled myself together to do the irreparable and instructed a good friend to check if the pictures were real. You never know, maybe it's editing. But the timid hope was dashed by reality. Margaret did have some fun on the side. Moreover, the pictures were definitely fresh, because they showed a tattoo that she had done quite recently. Of course, it's also my fault that my wife fell for it and cheated on me. I was always missing at work. One issue urgently needed to be resolved, then another. Of course, Aunt Isabel took care of the household chores, but it was my support that Margaret needed. It was this thirst for warmth and participation that this scoundrel caught her. I don't know how I was able to survive the betrayal then. I spoke harshly to Margaret, but within the law, without assault. She cried, promised that she would break off the connection, which jeopardized our marriage. I loved her very much then and decided to give her another chance, without even realizing that this would be a huge mistake. About a week after Margaret and I had an unpleasant conversation, and we seemed to agree to try to save our marriage, she disappeared along with her daughter. Aunt Isabel's wife told her that she needed to go to the children's clinic for a scheduled appointment, and she left home. This has happened before. Therefore, there was no reason not to release them. When Margaret and Dorothy did not return for dinner, Aunt Isabel became worried and began calling my wife to find out if it would make sense to reheat the food. But the phone was unreachable. Even then, there was no alarm. Aunt Isabel told me that Margaret and her daughter seemed to be late at the clinic, where appointments are usually on time and there should be no queues. And she asked to go there, saying that her heart was not in the right place. I rushed and found out that Margaret and her daughter had not appeared there at all. That's when I got worried. While driving along the route to the house, I was looking through my email and, having opened a letter demanding money and naturally a ban on contacting law enforcement agencies, I almost got into an accident by sharply slamming on the brakes. I did not officially contact the police. I was very afraid that I was being watched or wiretapped. And as best I could, I calmly drove to the house, and through Aunt Yu, whom I sent away from the house, fearing the wiretapping, I contacted a good friend so that he could help unofficially investigate the disappearance of his wife and daughter. He advised me to agree to all demands, and I did everything exactly according to the instructions of the criminals, and began to wait for news. I believed that I could make up for this money. But terrible information came. The police department called me and informed me that they had found Margaret's burnt-out car. There were 2 bodies inside, an adult woman and a baby. An examination followed. It was established that both lasting bodies belonged to my own girls. Aunt Isabel had a heart attack, and as a result, almost on the same day, 3 people, without whom I could not imagine my existence, ended up in their graves. I then began to get drunk almost every day, and some kind of supernatural anger helped me not to completely slide to the very bottom. I wanted to find the people responsible for the deaths of Margaret, Dorothy, and Aunt Isabel. But it was no use. The man seemed to have disappeared. My ill-wishers seemed to calm down. They even expressed sympathy. But running the business became completely uninteresting to me, and I sold it. Almost for next to nothing. You could say that he gave most of the money to charity, and he gradually began to learn to move on with his life. Justin fell silent, and Helga became perplexed. If the examination found that his wife and daughter died, it turns out that Diane cannot be involved in this tragic story. Why then did the man come to them? Was the expert mistaken, and the visitor buried someone else instead of his wife and daughter? The man seemed to have considered these unvoiced questions in Helga's eyes, because he spoke again and startled the woman with his confession. You seem to have already guessed that the girl you are raising is my daughter. Helga involuntarily began to shake her head, unable to say anything. And Justin, realizing that it was difficult for a woman to accept such news, gently began to tell him further. With difficulty, with the support of my parents, who themselves could barely hold on after the news of the death, but I stopped drinking. Although he changed his field of activity, he went back to business. What else did I have left? I didn't want to upset my parents, so as not to lose them. This is how I spent these endlessly long years, stretching from the moment I last saw my wife and daughter. I never became close to a single woman, fearing betrayal. And 2 days ago, returning from work, I saw a female figure at the gate of the house. I was surprised after all. Strangers usually don't wander around our ranch. I thought that maybe one of the neighbors' housekeepers or nannies needed something. He drove up and got out of the car. I come closer, and it's Margaret herself standing in front of the gate. She was emaciated. There were bruises under her eyes covering half her face. But undoubtedly my wife appeared before me, swaying. Of course, I was afraid for my own mind, suspecting that I had gone crazy. I went to visit my wife and daughter at the cemetery, and then suddenly there was such a turn. Margaret fell to her knees in front of me and began to beg for conversion, but I had no time for these sentiments. What worried me more was not even the fact that under the name of my wife, some other woman had found her last refuge in the churchyard. The most important thing for me was to find out why Margaret returned alone and where my daughter went. I dragged my wife into the house and began asking questions. And the more she talked, the worse I felt. It turns out that on the day of her disappearance, Margaret went to meet her lover, but not for fun. The man decided to get money from my wife using a video that he shot secretly and promised to post on all available networks in order to disgrace her, and at the same time undermine my business reputation. How Margaret cried when she said that she decided to take Dorothy with her, so that after meeting her lover she could drop into the clinic. The scoundrel decided to up the ante and said plans had changed. The money that Margaret brought was not enough for him. He demanded that she live in one of the houses as a living toy. Neither tears, nor pleas, nor promises of money could bribe this cynic. The only thing my wife could agree on was to save her daughter. So that the baby could not be recognized, she was changed. and her lover allowed Margaret's note to be printed on a printer, but not written by hand. Moreover, he strictly warned that if the text contains a hint of the name of the girl or her parents, then Dorothy will not survive. Laughing, he said that he would not feel sorry for the child. Frightened Margaret, of course, agreed to everything. She, naive, thought that I would certainly look for my daughter. And I didn't know that a lot of people were involved in this, and that false cases had already been prepared and the expertise was bought on the vine. Margaret was in some country hotel, and she was entertaining the crowd. And a week ago I managed to escape and get home. She may be exhausted with obvious health problems, but she accomplished the almost impossible and gave me hope. After listening to my wife's story, I realized that our daughter might be alive. We had to bring heaven to earth, but we managed to find the bribed expert and even get on the trail of the found little girl, about the same age as our Dorothy. It's good that Margaret roughly figured out how long they had been traveling before Dorothy was taken from her. It's just a miracle that you haven't moved anywhere. Otherwise, the search would have been delayed. It will probably be difficult for the girl to accept the truth, but Margaret and I are her parents. In fairness, it is we who must educate and raise her. We, of course, want to offer you compensation. We'll pay you any amount you name. Helga felt bad. Only in her worst dreams people came to her and tried to take Diane away. A woman would jump up screaming from such visions, invariably frightening the sensitive Frodo, and sometimes even her adopted daughter, who was generally known to sleep soundly. And now the nightmare is happening in reality, and it's impossible to wake up. The silence that settled on the veranda dragged on, and then Helga went on a tirade. Do you want to know what compensation will suit me? I'll tell you, simply leave me and my daughter Diane alone. I don't need anything more from you. Let me raise my daughter in peace, and don't dare interfere in our lives. A baby is not a toy. And for that matter, your wife has no excuse. Why the hell did she go there with her little daughter? It was clear that she was going towards the criminal. Again, this man of hers could easily do anything to the girl, and how would your thick-headed wife control him? Oh, he allowed her to print the letter. What a benefactor. Do you know that your daughter was planted under that apple tree for me? Frosty night. Did you see the dog that stood in front of your daughter? It was he who sensed that someone had appeared in the yard. If it weren't for him, it's scary to even think what would have happened to the baby. She was essentially left to the mercy of fate. Will it freeze or not? Do you think I'll give you my daughter so calmly? What for? No, I will fight and will definitely win. We are used to exchanging everything for money. Everything is for sale. Do you think you just need to name the price and you can calmly ruin fate? Who do you think you are? Helga took a breath and realized that businessmen have much more opportunities. She was frightened by the prospect of being left without a daughter and began to convince the man. You are an adult, and you understand that it will be difficult for a girl to change something in life. How can I explain to her that she will now have two mothers? Diane grew up in my arms. She's used to me and loves me. Can you imagine how much harm this unexpected news could cause her? Please, let's leave everything as it is. I tell you, Helga, no need to shock Diane. Please, if your daughter is dear to you, spare her. Don't ruin her fate. Of course you are running a business, and they are better off financially apparently. But is it just about money? Justin wanted to object, but at that moment his phone rang so loudly that Helga even flinched from the ringing. She saw how the man turned pale, almost silently listening to his interlocutor, and guessed that the complicated tragic story had received an unexpected continuation. At the end of the conversation, Justin roared. So you were completely powerless? Is this what you want to tell me? The voice from the receiver monotonously explained something, and Helga could hear the words. We sympathize. Sorry, we did everything we could. The woman realized that something irreparable had happened, and Justin, who ended the conversation, confirmed her assumption. Margaret died. This time there can be no mistake. I put her in the hospital with a doctor I knew so that they could treat her, at least give her some vitamins, and she, after being there for a while, just went out the window. Doctors tried to save Margaret, but her body was too exhausted. She was given anesthesia. She just fell asleep. Her heart stopped beating. Justin looked confused, and compassionate Helga brought him water and a sedative from her personal supplies. Here, take this medicine, you will feel better. The man thanked him in confusion and got up to leave. However, before reaching the door a few steps, he turned to Helga and asked, "Let's postpone the continuation of this conversation. I will arrive in 4 days, having previously agreed on a time convenient for you, and then we will decide what to do." Helga looked after Justin, and only when he got into the car parked at the beginning of the street, she hurried to her neighbor to get Diane, whom, it turns out, her parents called Dorothy. Frodo noticed the mistress in advance and opened the unlocked door for her. And Jane, who was happily playing checkers with the girl, immediately noticed that Olia had no face. After waiting for Diane to leave, Jane asked in a whisper, "What kind of guy came to see you? Ex yours or what? I really wanted to call Fyodor so that he would look at you by chance." Helga, who herself still couldn't believe the sudden turn of fate, did not tell her neighbor anything, limiting herself to gratitude for helping to keep the girl occupied and a promise. "I'll tell you everything later, but now we'll go. I'm kind of tired today." On the way home, Helga squeezed Diane's hand so tightly that she even playfully asked, "Mom, are you afraid that, like ours, one day I'll take a balloon and fly away?" The woman almost burst into tears, but tried not to let the girl notice her depressed mood. "Sorry, Diane, I was just lost in thought." Helga spent the whole night without sleep. She looked on the internet for all the information she could find about Justin, and was surprised that practically no sharply negative statements were published about him. Most of the articles were, of course, devoted to the misfortune that happened to his wife and daughter. Helga looked closely at the posted photos, but from the small images, and even in poor resolution, it was almost impossible to make out whether Diane or another child was in them. In the morning, after taking her daughter to kindergarten, the woman rushed to visit her daughter-in-law, warning her at work that she would be late for an hour. Lily, after listening to her, was silent for a long time, and then supported her relative. "Diane is officially your daughter. Perhaps her father can go to court. But it seems to me it is better to try to resolve the matter peacefully," Helga admitted. "Lily, I'm incredibly scared. Maybe I should just drop everything, take Diane and go somewhere, so that her father will never find us?" The daughter-in-law nipped the idea of running away in the bud, without even hearing to the end what country Helga had decided to leave for. "In my opinion, doing this will only complicate everything. You say that this Justin will come to you in 4 days. This means it will be approximately Saturday. So that's great. Denny and I are also present at this meeting. And it would also be a good idea to invite the lawyer who helped Diane win the case." When Justin called Helga and they agreed on a time to meet, the woman realized that there was nowhere to retreat. The businessman, to the surprise of the woman, her brother, daughter-in-law, and lawyer, arrived alone for the fateful negotiations. He had several large packages in his hands. Having met and shook hands with the men, Justin explained the contents of his burden. "These are all gifts for my daughter." After everyone was settled, the businessman began negotiations that were more difficult than he had ever conducted. "Helga, I am immensely grateful to you for preventing Dorothy, let me call her that, from staying in a government institution for a long time. I am ashamed that I believed in the results of the examination and did not double-check them. After all, having done this, the search for my daughter would not have been stopped, and we would have met with her much earlier. I've been thinking all these days, and he made a difficult decision. Let's not shock the girl. You, Helga, were absolutely right when you said that the truth would only bring her suffering. Let everything remain as it is. I have only one request. Under any pretext, allow me to come and visit my daughter. I won't bother you often, but at least on weekends. Let's go somewhere together." The lawyer, realizing that his services would not be needed, hurried to leave, and Justin, Denny, Helga, and Lily sat, thinking a little more about how to introduce Diane to her father. As a man who cares about the beauty of his nails and comes in for a manicure, or as a colleague, Lily came up with a brilliant idea. "Oh, what's there to invent? Justin, come as a fan. Then gifts for Diane would be appropriate." Everyone agreed on this option. And Lily's idea turned out to be very promising. In the process of communication, sincere sympathy arose between Helga and Justin. A year after they met, which began with extreme stress, they got married, and the man legally became the father of his own daughter. A little later, he resolved all the issues in his hometown and moved to Ole and Diane to always be close to those he loves.